Chapter 26, I Hate You. The next morning Tatsuya woke up early like he is used to and went for his morning workout, but surprising for him Miyuki was not accompanying him. Tatsuya thought for a while if something was wrong and used his magic to find where she was. Getting her presents from her room, he thought, they must be talking till late in the night. He shrugged his thoughts and went out. After completing his workout, he came back completely drenched in sweat. He opened the door and went inside. While walking towards the kitchen he smelled something good. When he entered the kitchen he found Himari cooking something for the breakfast. When Himari noticed someone coming inside the kitchen, she turned around to look who was there. When she found that Tatsuya came, she gave him a smile and said, "Breakfast will be done in a while, you should go and take a shower and get refreshed." Tatsuya also smiled back at her and nodded before going to bathroom. After taking a shower Tatsuya came out and saw that Himari was setting the table. He then went towards her and decided to help her and said that she should go and wake the others up. Complying to his request, Himari went to wake the others up and Tatsuya set the table. All of them sat around the table and started to eat their food. Tatsuya took a bite of his food and then looked towards Himari and said, "It's delicious, Himari, it's been a long time since someone made something for me, so I really appreciate it." He gave a small and gentle smile which made Himari blushed. Looking at both of them, Miyuki and Kurumi gave a glare of jealousy to Himari. Himari looked at them for a while and then smirked. Seeing his smirk, both of them had nerves popping on their foreheads. Tatsuya ignored the three of them and continued eating his breakfast. After finishing the meal, Tatsuya gave some money to the girls and asked them to accompany Himari in buying some clothes and necessities that she might require. He could not accompany them as he had some work in his restaurant. After working for a while in the kitchen, Tatsuya went out to take a break, and just as he stepped out of the gate he bumped into someone and fell back. He immediately got up and said, "I am sorry for bumping into you, it was not intentional." He moved his hand forward for the person to get up. The person he bumped into was a girl with short black hair. The girl took his hand and said, "No, it's not your fault, I was not looking ahead while running, I hope you can forgive me." She bowed her head towards Tatsuya. Seeing her actions, Tatsuya lightly chuckled and said, "You don't have to apologize, I am fine, by the way, I am Tatsuya Shiba, nice to meet you." The girl nodded and said, "Nice to meet you as well, I am Sana Satrai and I apologize again for bumping into you." Just as Tatsuya was about to speak, a pink blur appeared in front of him and Sana vanished from her spot. "Sotan found you," said a voice. "Oni-sama, control yourself," said another voice. Tatsuya looked at the source of the voice and saw Surfall hugging Sana tightly. Surfall kept hugging Sana tightly but saw Tatsuya standing near them and got excited and enveloped him in a hug as well and said, "Tatsuya-chan, what are you doing here? Did you miss me?" Tatsuya, who was still in her embrace, said, "I am here because you are literally standing in front of my restaurant and I missed you, Sira." Surfall, who heard him, became embarrassed and then smiled on hearing that he missed her. "I missed you as well, and this time I brought my sister as well," said Surfall excitedly. "I am happy meeting you and all," but said Tatsuya with a happy face, but it soon turned neutral and both him and Sana said at the same time, "Can you please put us down?" Hearing them, Surfall was a bit disappointed but still put both of them down. When they got out of her embrace, Sana bowed towards Tatsuya and said, "I am sorry for my sister's actions, she is a bit childish." Tatsuya waved his hands and said, "No need, I know, how excited can she be?" Sana looked up and then looked at him and asked, "How do you know Oni-sama?" "Oh, she is just a regular customer and we are good friends, that's all." Tatsuya then looked at her intently and said, "So you are the infamous Sotan who don't like magical girls and is cold to Sirahe." Hearing Tatsuya talking about her, Sana got embarrassed and looked towards Surfall with hatred. When Surfall noticed her gaze, she looked away from her and then asked Tatsuya, "So what are you doing, Tatsuya-chan?" Tatsuya looked at her with an expressionless face and said, "Don't try change the topic. Anyways, I am just taking a break from my work in the kitchen, what about you?" Surfall pouted cutely and then smiled and said, "I just came to treat Sotan lunch and to meet." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Then follow me, the restaurant is already full, you would not be able to eat there." Tatsuya turned around and started walking. Surfall didn't think anything and followed Tatsuya happily. Seeing her sister's carefree attitude, Sana sighed at her carelessness but still followed. Tatsuya went to his house and opened the door and went inside. He didn't saw anyone in there and thought that the others were still shopping. Tatsuya sent a telepathic message to them about the current situation. He invited the sisters in his home and made them seated in the living room. He gave them a cup of tea and some refreshments and went to the kitchen to cook. While he was cooking, Sana and Surfall were sitting in the living room. Sana turned towards to Surfall and asked, "Why are we here, Oni-sama?" Surfall smiled and said, "Like I said, I want to treat you an excellent lunch." Sana looked at Surfall intently and said, "What's the real reason?" Surfall smiled and said, as sharp as ever, "I just wanted you to have more friend, and who knows, if you found him interesting, you can ask him to join your peerage." Sana sighed and said, "He is just a normal human, and why do you want me to have more friends?" Surfall stopped smiling and turned to her Oni-san mad and asked, "How many friends do you have?" Hearing her question, Sana looked away and said, "Oh, what are you saying? I can't hear you." Hearing her sister, Sana got agitated and said, "I said that I have 2 friends." Realizing what she just did, Sana became red from embarrassment and looked away. Seeing her embarrassed, Surfall hugged her and started laughing. Tatsuya, who heard them from the kitchen, couldn't help but sigh. After a few moments he went back to the living room and said, "Lunch is ready, let's go eat before it turns cold." Surfall nodded and jumped from the sofa with Sana in her embrace. Tatsuya looked at Sana and said in a mocking tone, "You really do love your sister." Sana, who heard him, got red and looked away while saying, "Shut up." Tatsuya just laughed and led them to the dining room. In the dining room there were 6 plates on the table. Seeing 6 plates, Sana and Surfall got confused and asked, "Is there someone joining us?" Tatsuya looked at them and said, "Yeah, my housemates will be joining, I hope you don't mind." Hearing him, Surfall smiled and said, "It's alright, we don't mind. Where are they?" Just when Surfall asked him, the doorbell rung. Tatsuya smiled and said, "They're." Hearing his answer, they all laughed and Tatsuya went to open the door. Tatsuya came back with the others and introduced them to each other. While eating they talked a lot, and Miyuki got along well with Surfall because they both like magical girls. Seeing Miyuki getting along with Surfall, Sana felt a little bitter, as she also wanted to be frank with her sister but was unable to do so. Seeing her like that, Tatsuya came near her and said in a slow voice, feeling jealous. Hearing his voice, Sana got startled and looked back at him with a blush and said, "No." Tatsuya had a mischievous smile on his face and said, "List," and started chuckling. Seeing him chuckle, Sana gritted her teeth and lashed out, "No, I am not." They both continued to bicker for a while and the others left them alone and went to watch a movie. Both of them were breathing heavily from all the arguing that they had done. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Let's leave it at that for now, we will continue it later, I am tired of this." Sana didn't said anything and just nodded. They both went to the living room and saw the others watching a movie. They both sat down and watched the movie for a while, but it didn't interest them. Tatsuya looked at her and asked, "Want to do something else?" Sana looked back at him and said, "Sure, do you have something in mind?" Tatsuya shook his head in denial. Sana thought for a while and said with a grin, "Let's play chess then, I want to see you lose." Tatsuya looked at her and said with a small smile, "We will see who will lose." Tatsuya brought a chess set and they both started playing. In the beginning the match looked in Sana's favor, but Tatsuya turned the tables at the later part of the match. They both were very excited playing with the match and ignored the others who were watching them attentively. After a while both Tatsuya and Sana sighed in disappointment as the match ended in a draw, but they were happy as they enjoyed match. After their match was over, Surfall came towards them and said, "Let's go back, Sana, it's very late." Hearing that they were going back, Miyuki became sad. Sana was sad as well but didn't show it on her face. Tatsuya, seeing all this, turned towards Surfall and said, "Sira, why don't you stay here for the night, as it is already very late?" Miyuki would be happy as well. Surfall looked at Miyuki, who was looking at her with puppy dog eyes. Surfall tried to resist but at last got defeated and said, Fine, we will stay here." Happy now, Miyuki smiled and nodded. Tatsuya then made a mischievous face and said, "You will not be disappointed as I have prepared something that you would like a lot." Surfall smiled at him but didn't expect too much from Tatsuya. Tatsuya then prepared dinner for everyone and after dinner gave them some pajamas which belonged to Miyuki and Kurumi to them and said, "Let's go, I will show you the guest room." They nodded and followed him. Tatsuya opened the door and switched on the lights. He turned towards them and said, "There is only one bed, so you need to sleep together." Hearing him, Surfall's face brightened up and she hugged Tatsuya very tightly. She left him and grabbed Sana, who was trying to leave the room silently. Tatsuya looked at her and gave her a mocking smirk and said, "I hope you liked my hospitality, Sira." Surfall nodded her head vigorously but Sana gave a death glare to Tatsuya. Tatsuya turned around and before closing the door said, enjoy. Sana, who saw him set her up and then leaving, was enraged and shouted, I hate you, Tatsuya. Chapter 27, 2 years and spar. The next day when Sana woke up and saw Tatsuya, she gave him a death glare. Tatsuya, who saw this, smiled and gave her a thumbs up and said, it looks like you enjoyed a lot. Hearing this, Sana snapped, grabbed his collar and started shaking him and said, like hell I enjoyed, you idiot. Sir Fall, who looked at them, smiled and said, looks like you both are getting along well. Hearing this, Sana looked towards Sir Fall and shouted, no, we are not. Tatsuya then hugged her from the back and placed his head on his shoulder and said, don't be like that, we can play chess yesterday, don't you have any fun? Sana, who heard this, turned her head and looked at him, who was resting his head on her shoulder. Sana sighed and said, yes, I did enjoy that and I am sorry for snapping at you, now lift your head off my shoulder and stay away. Hearing her, Tatsuya smiled back and said, I am glad to know that you enjoyed it, the next time you come here I would let you bath with Sira. Sana got embarrassed and again started lashing out at him. Seeing her sister not being cold, Sir Fall smiled and enclosed both of them in a hug, which made Sana's blush even deeper. From that day on, Sana too came with Sir Fall whenever she visits him. Tatsuya would leave no chances to tease Sana, and because of that Sana too would lose her cool and snap at him. Even though Sir Fall was happy seeing that her sister had started to enjoy more, she was jealous of Tatsuya because it was him and not her that Sana would open up to. She would often glare at Tatsuya, which he responded with a smile. Seeing him smile, Sir Fall would simply sign and let that be, as Tatsuya treated her good even though she was childish and clingy. Tatsuya would not complain or felt annoyed by her unlike others. She even thought of asking him to join her peerage but stopped thinking about it as she felt Sana would want to add him in her peerage. They still didn't knew that all the members of the Shiba house were related to supernatural world, and they too decided to not tell them. Tatsuya also started to train Himari the same way he started with Miyuki. Himari was low high class level at the time she joined them, and at the beginning of the training she was overwhelmed by the amount of training Tatsuya made her do and wanted to retort, but she stopped when Miyuki said, "He not even able to do this much, how cute Shinomiya Kagaya style." Every time she remembered her word, along with her mocking tone, would ignite new passion in her and stopped complaining about her training. Even though her way was wrong, Miyuki still motivated her and was often praised by Tatsuya because of it. But even though Tatsuya praised her, she was a bit disturbed as she was helping a rival. Kurumi also trained her in chakra and senjutsu, and her being a yokai and a Niko Shao, at that her progress skyrocketed and she gained another tail. She also started to spar with Miyuki from time to time, as both of them were around the same level. Tatsuya too tagged along with them in their spar, though both of them would be against him as they were still not able to land a hit on him, as Tatsuya held back a little less than usual. He again gave the same quest to Himari like the one he gave to Miyuki. If she would be able to land a hit on him, he would give her a weapon. Knowing that she would get a new weapon, she was very excited and trained more seriously than before. Seeing that she was doing good, Tatsuya also trained her in ki manipulation, which she used along with her chakra to strengthen her body, and infusing her ki with toki made her physical attacks more powerful. She had a bit problem in flying, but training regularly made her better in it. She has also started to try to control the dark energy, and with Tatsuya's help she was able to control a slight bit of it. She was overjoyed when she was able to control the power which labeled her as cursed. She ran towards Tatsuya and hugged him while silently crying with happiness. Tatsuya did nothing and patted her head and scratched her ears. After a while Himari too started purring, and when Tatsuya let his guard down while caressing her ears, she took advantage of it and pulled his head and kissed him. Tatsuya, though he was surprised, didn't refuse her and enjoyed the kiss. Seeing that Miyuki and Kurumi felt slightly jealous but let it go, as they knew that Himari was happy for overcoming her curse. Like others, now Kurumi had something to train. Though she was not able to use magic or ki, she was able to use toki, which Himari taught her. She was very interested in it as it was a new concept to her, and tried her knowledge from her previous world to make it suitable to be used by her. Like this 2 years passed. Both Miyuki and Himari at the bottleneck of breakthrough to the ultimate class, but were not able to break that cap. They were very disappointed with it, as their progress till now was very fast, but now their growth rate had slowed down, but they didn't thought about it too much. They just need to train much harder, and with time they would be able to break through it. Right now Tatsuya and the others were in their time chamber having a spar. Tatsuya had grown taller, and now his childish face was a little less evident as he looked slightly more matured. He now has fine muscles but was not ripped. He now looked much more handsome than before. That even Sana blushed whenever she saw her smile, which made Sir Fall jealous, but she too felt that Tatsuya looked handsome. Himari has started to become more beautiful and had started to get mature. She also became tall and her breasts had started to grow as well. Miyuki too has become more beautiful but was still a bit childish. She also gained a bit height and her breasts grew as well though they were smaller than Himari's. "Is this all you got, Hui?" said Tatsuya while dodging Himari's slash. He jumped back but suddenly felt something behind him. He immediately turned around and swung his sword cutting an ice shard aimed at him. He looked at Miyuki, attacking someone's back. "Hey, I didn't know you would use something like this, Miyuki." Miyuki smiled at him and said, "Do you think that we have any chance of hitting you if you tried to fight you nicely, Ani-sama?" Tatsuya didn't said anything and gave her a bright smile. Miyuki sighed and then looked at him with seriousness. Tatsuya also stopped and jumped up and avoided the slash from Himari. "Don't forget about me." Himari smirked and also followed him and both of them started clashing their swords. Miyuki didn't waste any time and launched multiple ice spears accelerated with wind magic towards Tatsuya. Feeling that the ice spears were coming towards him, he kicked Himari who blocked it with her katana but still flew back. Tatsuya started to store fire energy in his sword and slashed forward releasing a huge wave of fire towards Miyuki, melting the spears in the way. Seeing the wave coming towards her, Miyuki stabbed her sword on the ground and a thick wall of ice formed in front of her but immediately flew back when she noticed that her wall would not be able to hold back the wave. Tatsuya just stood there and placed the sword on his shoulders and said, "What happened?" Giving up. Miyuki and Himari looked at him and gritted their teeth. Just as they were about to give up, Tatsuya said, "How about this then? Even if one of you is able to hit me, I would take both of you shopping." Hearing this, their eyes lit up. They looked at each other and nodded. Himari started to add chakra to her katana making it sharper and faster, and Miyuki started making multiple spears of ice and again accelerating them with wind magic. Miyuki looked towards Himari for confirmation who nodded in response. Just as she nodded, Miyuki launched all the spears towards Tatsuya who again started to store gyre energy in his sword but was interrupted by Himari who was cladded in dark energy and slashed towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya dodged but Himari again slashed towards him. He kept on blocking and dodging her slashes. Suddenly Himari jumped back and many spears came near Tatsuya. Tatsuya gripped his sword tighter and started slashing towards the spears, destroying them with the blade heated with fire magic. Seeing him destroying the spears, Miyuki said something to Himari and after listening to her whole plan she nodded in approval. Miyuki started channeling more mana through her body and made a giant boulder and launched towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya, who just finished destroying the spears, suddenly saw her surroundings getting darker. He looked up and blew a whistle before covering his sword with wind and fire and sent a firestorm towards the boulder, but just as he sent the firestorm towards the boulder, Himari came from behind and attacked him. Tatsuya, who was busy blocking the boulder, made another sword in his other hand and blocked her strike. But he was surprised as this time Himari grabbed his hand rather than attacking him again. Soon he felt some coldness coming towards him and saw that Miyuki was coming to attack him. Miyuki came too close to him and seeing that there was no other choice, Tatsuya lifted Himari and threw her at Miyuki. Tatsuya immediately used this chance and added more power to the firestorm and got rid of the boulder. He then looked at the girls and said, "I guess this is enough." The girls didn't said anything but smiled at him. Tatsuya was confused by it but then immediately looked at the arm which was held by Himari and saw a fine scratch on it and said, "I guess I will take you shopping this weekend." When Tatsuya was busy looking at Miyuki coming closer, she used her claws and made a slash on his arms. The girls jumped happily and gave each other high five and started discussing about the date. Tatsuya, who heard them, could only shake his head and sighed. Chapter 28, I should give him a reward instead. After the spar was over, Tatsuya was approached by Miyuki and Himari who were looking at him with an expectation. Seeing their look, Tatsuya chuckled and patted their head and praised them. After a while he stopped, much to the girls' disappointment. He then looked at Himari and said, "Since you were able to land a hit on me, I guess I owe you a weapon." After saying that, a light shine in his hands which made the others close their eyes because of the brightness. When the light dimmed down, they opened their eyes and saw Tatsuya holding a katana with a blue hilt and covered in a blue sheath kurikara. Himari was about to take it from his hands but Tatsuya stopped her and said, "Wait a minute, let me first explain about this weapon to you." Himari stopped and nodded before looking at him intently. Tatsuya also nodded and said, "This is no normal katana. With this you would be able to control flames, more specifically blue flames, which are much more fiercer than normal flames. You are able to activate or deactivate the flames at will, but the control over the flame will depend on your proficiency. If not handled carefully, you can even injure an ally or yourself too, so always bear that in mind." Seeing Himari nod, Tatsuya smiled and gave him the katana before jumping back with Miyuki. Himari on receiving the katana was very excited. She slowly took it out of its sheath and caressed her hand over the blade. She then willed the flames to appear and then suddenly the whole blade was covered in blue flames. She was mesmerized by the flames and stared at it for a while. She then thought of using the flames just like Tatsuya did in their spar and waved her sword. A large amount of flames come out of the katana but seemed uncontrollable. Seeing that Himari was unable to control the flames, Tatsuya stepped forward and used his devouring magic and devoured all the flames. Being all out of energy, Himari fell but was caught by Tatsuya before she hit the floor. She was about to thank him, she received an hit on her head from Tatsuya, who looked at her with a displeased expression and said, "Didn't I told you that the control depends on your proficiency and can even hurt you because of the lack of control? Why did you do something dangerous? Do you seriously wanted to injure yourself and make me worry?" Hey. Hearing him, Himari became sad but felt a bit happy that he was worried about her. She hugged him tightly and said, "I am sorry, I won't do something like this again. Thank you for worrying about me." She gave him a peck on his cheek and then buried her head back in his chest but was soon pulled out by Miyuki, who was looking at her with a glare and said, "You have some nerve by making Oni-sama worried and the taking his advantage." Hey. Himari, who heard her, sighed and said, "You are right, I should not take his advantage in that situation." Miyuki looked at her with a shocked expression but that soon turned into an angry one when she saw what she did next. Himari looked towards Tatsuya and pulled his face and gave him a deep kiss. She released herself from the kiss with a string of saliva attached to her mouth, with a heavy breathing and said, "Rather than taking advantage, I should give him a reward for saving me instead." She looked towards Miyuki with a victorious smug which provoked her more, making her lash out at her. Tatsuya, who saw them arguing, sighed and left the room. He didn't wanted to involve himself into their argument because he knew that even though they bicker a lot, they still treat each other as sisters. He went to take a shower to refresh him after all that training and also that he was very sweaty from the practice. After taking a bath, Tatsuya changed his clothes and went to help in his restaurant. After completing his shift, Tatsuya went back to his home. After entering his home, he found Himari preparing dinner. He went towards with the intention to help her, but she said, "Just sit back and relax. Let me cook today as you must be tired too." Tatsuya tried to protest but Himari didn't listen to him and he finally left the dinner to Himari. Seeing as he had nothing better to do, he decided to take a stroll. He turned towards the others and asked, "You guys want anything? I am going for a stroll." The others thought for a while and told him what they wanted. Kurumi also decided to go inside Tatsuya as it had been a while since she had been there. Tatsuya changed his clothes and set off along with Kurumi inside of him. They both were talking to each other through their mental link while Tatsuya was greeting some people along the way. Many people in his area knew him and they had a good impression of him. After buying the things which he required, Tatsuya was in his way back when he suddenly felt a supernatural presence. Kurumi too felt it and they both decided to check it. Tatsuya stored the things in his pocket dimension and started moving towards the location. Chapter 29, Yo. In a rundown warehouse in Kyoto, many cloaked people were present and were talking to each other, more like trying to pass their time. They seemed to be waiting for someone, but it looked like the people who they were waiting for were late. Unable to bear the boredom and feeling frustrated, one of the cloaked persons slammed his fist in the wall and said, "They are clearly mocking us, making the magician's faction of the Chaos Brigade wait so long. Those devils seem to have a death wish or what?" Hearing him, many other people in the group raised their voices as well. All of them were very irritated, and when one of them rose their voice, the others too let out their emotions and started to complain as well. "Boss, I say that we should kill them the moment they arrive. They have to know that we are not mere pushovers who they can control. Even if they are devils, we are not any less formidable than them." The boss of those magician didn't said anything and looked at his subordinates and said in a cold voice, "Shut up." Hearing his cold tone, the subordinates stopped complaining and looked at him, waiting to answer them. The boss looked at everybody and then said, "I know that you all are very irritated, I too am bored. But this mission is important. We the magicians need to get hold of any kind of magic power that we can get. We will definitely increase our strength and rule over this world, but we need to have patience. The thing that we will get today will increase our power by a huge margin, so we cannot do anything before we get our hands on it." Hearing their leader's answer, the subordinates calmed down and now waited patiently for the devils to arrive. They too wanted to get their hands on power, because in supernatural world the more power you have, the larger influence you will have, and having higher influence can be a good thing to save one's life from time to time. While they had again started talking to each other, a magic circle appeared inside the warehouse and 5 people came out of the circle. All 5 of them were men, but one of them were carrying 2 girls on his shoulders. The one in the middle of them came forward and said, "Sorry for being late, I hope that you didn't wait for long." The magicians who heard him internally cursed him, and all of them thought, "Like hell, we didn't wait for long, we waited for 3 hours, a fricking 3 hours. Is all that time just a shit to you?" The man who was the boss of the magicians looked towards the devil with an expressionless face and asked, "Have you brought that? And I would also like to inquire why you were so late." The devil who heard him was dissatisfied with the magician's answer but still held his cool and said, "Yes, we have that, and we are late because we ran into a girl who tried to stop us." Man, seriously, Abaddon clan's magic sure holds up to its recognition that took a hell out of us. When the magician heard this, his eyes widened and he looked towards to the 2 girls on one of the devil's shoulders. The man again looked back at the devil who was talking to him and said, "You mean to say that you have brought both a Leviathan and an Abaddon, hey?" The devil looked back with a smug smile and said, "Yes, we have both of them. You want to buy the other one too?" The magician didn't thought too much and said, "Of course, getting the hands on one of the 72 pillars magic is not an opportunity one comes across so easily." The devil's smile broadened and he said, "Of course, and you don't have to worry about restraining them as the Leviathan is asleep and we have broken the limbs of the Abaddon and her magic is depleted already. Now let's talk about the pric." Just as he was about to continue, the devil was engulfed in a tower of flames. The other devils who came along with him were shocked by this and looked towards the magicians with a hateful expression. The boss of the magicians looked at the other devils and said, "Thank you for adding a bonus to our request, and since you have completed your task, you all can die." The other magicians who heard him came out of shock and laughed evilly. They understood that their boss was never going to let them live from the beginning. They all started chanting their spells and were ready to attack the devils. The devils who now understood the motives of the magicians started preparing their own magic. Suddenly a large number of projectiles were fired towards the devils. The devils who saw the number of projectiles coming towards him were very scared and angry. They immediately set up a barrier to protect them, but they knew that the barrier would not hold on long enough. The devil who was carrying the girls was unable to take it any longer and said, "You pieces of shit, you should know that the girls are still with us and will die too." The boss magician who heard this looked at him with an amused expression and said, "You mean these girls?" and tapped his staff on the ground. When he said that, the girls vanished from the devil's shoulder and appeared besides the magician. The devils were shocked by this and were panicking as their bargaining chip was now in their enemies' hands. The head magician was about to attack the devils when suddenly the door of the warehouse opened and a boy came in and raised his hand and said, "Yo." Chapter 30, Dogza. All the people present there looked towards the man, or more clearly Tatsuya, as if he was stupid and were wondering what a human was doing there. Even the blonde-haired girl whose limbs were broken looked towards the boy who came and was also wondering what he was doing. Some of the magicians came out of the stupor and then said, "What the hell are you doing here, kid? This is no place for playing, go back now or you will die," and released some of his aura and directed it towards Tatsuya so as to scare him. Tatsuya, who noticed the small amount of aura, shrugged his shoulders and asked, "What are you guys doing here so late at night?" The magicians were surprised on seeing that Tatsuya was not affected by their aura and got angry. One of the magicians walked towards him and grabbed his collar and said, "You didn't hear or what? Want to have an early death, you shit?" Tatsuya, who was still expressionless, sighed and said, "You know what, forget it, people like you are not used to people asking you politely." Tatsuya then looked at the magician and turned him into Stone Seiki's power and then freed himself. All the people who saw that were shocked. The magicians who were still young or new were very angry and wanted to attack him, but the sensible and experienced ones were now wary of him. The devils were wary of him as they didn't know whether he was on their side or not. The girl with blonde hair was also having the same thoughts as the other devils. She couldn't trust anyone there. Seeing that the others were still silent, Tatsuya said, "I will ask again what you people are doing here late at night." Hearing his question, one of the younger magician yelled, "It's none of your business, kid, stop interfering if you know what's good for you." Tatsuya glared at the person who said that, making him taking a step back in fear. He then looked around the room and then his eyes landed on the 2 girls besides the boss magician. The blonde-haired girl noticed Tatsuya looking at her and, as if getting the message, she made a determined expression and said, "Those devils kidnapped us and brought us here in order to sell us." The devils and the magicians looked at the girl with hatred, but then again looked back at Tatsuya when they heard his voice. Is that girl speaking the truth? Hearing him, another inexperienced magician came forward and said, "That's right, now scram before we kill you." Tatsuya then looked at the people present there once more and then gave a tired sigh and said, Why is this town always has something illegal going on? Oi, which faction do you guys belong to? Again the same magician answered him and said, we are from the magician faction of the Chaos Spree. Just as he was about to finish, the boss magician fired a spell at him and said, why the hell are you giving him information so easily? Tatsuya looked at the boss with a dumbfounded expression and said, you only realized it just now. All the others looked at him for answers. The man noticed all the people looking at him, he gave a fake cough and said, state your purpose for coming here, kid. Now you just changed the subject. Oh well, I came here because I sensed some disturbance in Mana, and now that I know that you all are doing something illegal, I have to do some extermination. Man, keeping the town clean because of Yasaka asked me to is very tiring. Well, whatever, just surrender and I will not kill you. The devils and the magicians who heard him started laughing and said, you will kill us? Hey, some of you take care of the best, meanwhile we take care of the devils. The boss was about to turn towards the devils but stopped. What he saw made him very afraid. He saw his men getting disappear in small light particles at the same time when he asked them to attack Tatsuya. Tatsuya was holding 2 silver guns in his hands and his hands were aiming in the direction in which the bodies of magicians disappeared. He turned towards the boss and said, don't say that I didn't warn you. Tatsuya said and started firing at many people present in the room. All of them got shocked and scared and decided to fight back. The magicians started firing spells at him, to which Tatsuya replied by either dodging or nullifying the spells. All of them were driven into a corner, but then suddenly the boss of the magicians came forward. Seeing him walk in front of them, many of his subordinates started cheering and saying stuff like, do it boss, or we know you can do it. The boss stood still and looked at Tatsuya with determination. Seeing him, his men and even the devils got excited. The boss raised his staff and said, looks like I have to use my trump card. The people who heard him looked towards him excitedly and began discussing about his trump card. The man raised his hands even higher. The others who saw him all thought, here it comes, but then suddenly the man kneeled down in Dogza and shouted, forgive me, I surrender. And then everyone had a dramatic fall except for Tatsuya, who knew what the man was planning through his telepathy. Tatsuya decided to play along with it and lowered his gun and said, so you finally decided to surrender, hey? The boss looked up and nodded his head and said, there is just one thing that I want to do. When he said that, a large magic circle appeared on the ground and a lot more magicians emerged from the circle. Seeing the large number of magicians, the fellow magicians regained their confidence and the devils followed their example and summoned their teammates. The devils and the magicians looked towards Tatsuya, who was still neutral, and started to laugh maniacally. The others also explained the situation to the ones who just arrived and they too joined them in their laughter. The blonde-haired girl was now worried and scared on seeing the large number of devils and magicians and thought that she has no way of escape now. The devil and the magician boss pointed their finger at Tatsuya and said, now how will you defeat all of us at the same time? We in total are around 50, and that too without adding those devils, so what will you do now, kid? Beg for mercy and maybe I can give you a painless death. And then pointed his finger on the ground. Tatsuya looked around the warehouse and gave a tired sigh. He brought his hand close and made a sign and said, multi-shadow clone jutsu, and then around 500 Tatsuyas appeared with a puff of smoke. Seeing the sheer number of clones, the eyes of all the people in the room were almost popping out, their throats got dried and were unable to move because of shock. All the Tatsuyas then pointed their guns at them and said, now what will you do? Hearing him, all of the devils and magicians threw their weapons and deactivated their magic, and then all at the same time went into Dogza position and said, we are sorry. We are ready to surrender. Hearing them, Tatsuya gave a small smile and said, too late, and all of them pulled the trigger at the same time, and everyone in the warehouse except for the girls and Tatsuya vanished in light particles. Chapter 31, Kurika. After all of the magicians and the devils were killed, Tatsuya looked towards the 2 girls and asked, want some help? The blonde who heard him got out of her stupor and then looked at Tatsuya as if he was a monster. She was still hesitant of him and didn't answer him. Tatsuya, who was waiting for her to answer, sighed and started walking towards her. He squatted down and started to use his magic and to heal her, but didn't heal her instantly as he still didn't know what were her intentions. The blonde-haired girl noticed that Tatsuya was walking towards her and wanted to put up her guard but was unable to. When she saw him crouching down and moving his hand towards her, she closed her eyes and readied herself for more pain, but instead of pain she felt a soothing sensation easing her pain. She looked up and saw that Tatsuya was the reason of that sensation, and then she relaxed a bit and asked, who are you? Why are you helping me? Tatsuya looked back at her and said in an amused voice, oh, now you are willing to talk but you should know that it is common etiquette to introduce yourself first before asking the others. When she heard Tatsuya she blushed a bit due to embarrassment and said, "Sorry for my rudeness, my name is Koisha Abadan, a devil, and I thank you for saving not me and the lady beside me." Tatsuya nodded and said, "I am Tatsuya Shiba, a human, and I don't misunderstand. I only saved you so as to interrogate you, and if I find you doing something that shouldn't be done here you will experience a similar fate as those men like before." Koisha, who heard him, shuddered on the thought of what Tatsuya could do to her. She looked in his eyes and said, "You don't have to worry, I will answer you to the extent I am able to, but nothing too personal." Tatsuya nodded and removed her hand and stood up and said, "I have healed you quite a bit to the extent that you will be back to normal in a week or so, and now." Suddenly Kurumi appeared beside him. Tatsuya turned towards Kurumi and said, "Take them home and put them in the guest room, and don't forget to restrain their magic. I will come back after cleaning the mess here." Kurumi nodded and carried both the girls on her shoulders and then looked towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya then formed a magic circle and Kurumi stepped on it and they teleported to his home. Tatsuya gave a tired sigh and started to massage his temples and thought, "These type of things are increasing in the town lately. I will ask Yasaka later to let me cuddle her tails and ears as compensation." Tatsuya then looked at one of the corners of the warehouse and said, "I know you are hiding there, so are you coming out peacefully or you want me to do it in a rougher way?" Tatsuya waited for a moment after saying that, and when he still didn't receive an answer he moved his hand in that direction, and then various ropes made of magic came out of the ground and then launched in the direction. When the ropes reached the corner he heard a loud neigh. Tatsuya motioned through his hands and then the ropes started coming back with a busted girl who was entangled in the ropes. When the woman was in front of him Tatsuya looked at her with an expressionless face, but on the inside was a different story. On seeing the girl wearing black kimono with cat ears only one thought came to his mind, "Holy shit! It's Kurika, I didn't know that I would meet her this soon. Today is definitely a lucky day meeting 3 characters on the same day. I really want to rub her ears." No, control yourself Tatsuya, control, you can do it later." Kurika looked at the boy in front of her and then asked in her usual playful voice, "Naya, you like this types of kinky plays?" Tatsuya didn't answer her and pointed his gun at her. Kurika, who saw the gun, got scared as she had seen his power with her own eyes but didn't show it on her face. She looked back at Tatsuya and said, Wait, don't be too stiff, I will talk, so ask whatever you like." Tatsuya lowered his gun and asked, "Who are you and what are you doing here, and don't dare lie, I will know it instantly." Kurika's expression didn't change and she said, "Name's Kurika Anikomata, as you can see, virgin and my 3 sizes." Just as she was about to continue Tatsuya again pointed his gun and said, "What were you saying?" Kurika didn't flinch, but on the inside she was very afraid. She pouted and said, "You are no fun, Naya. I came here to spy on those robed guys which you killed just now to know what they were planning, Naya." Tatsuya used his telepathy and knew that she was telling the truth or not, and found that she was indeed saying the truth. He looked in her eyes and asked, "Which faction do you belong to? Were you also trying to do trafficking?" Tatsuya narrowed his eyes and glared at her. Seeing his glare, Kurika for the first time changed her expression into that of panic and said, No, we were not doing anything of that sorts, I just came here to spy on them, that's all, Naya." Tatsuya looked at her for a while, but suddenly he heard a growl. He looked at Kurika's stomach, which was making a noise, and looked back at Kurika, who was laughing awkwardly with a slight blush on her face. On seeing her expression Tatsuya sighed and put his gun down and then released her. Kurika instantly fell on her butt. She looked back at Tatsuya with fake tears in her eyes and said, "Is this how you treat a lady, Naya? You should treat a delicate flower like me with care, Naya." Tatsuya scoffed and said, "Yeah, like someone delicate would be sent to spy on that many and powerful enemies," and offered his hand. Kurika took her hand and then stood up while rubbing her butt and said, "Who said a delicate person cannot be skilled, Naya?" Tatsuya sighed in annoyance and said, "Whatever, come with me, you are hungry, right? Let's go, my treat." Kurika, who heard him, hugged her body and said, "Oh, you want to take advantage of me by making me come with you for food? You pervert, Naya." Tatsuya looked back at her and gave her a head chop and said, "Quit playing around, either come with me or leave, I have many other things to do." Kurika rubbed her head and said, "Hey, didn't I say that I am delicate? Handle me with care, Naya." Tatsuya ignored her and asked, "You coming, or not?" Kurika used her senjutsu and knew that Tatsuya didn't have any ill will towards her. She humphed and jumped on his back and said, "Okay, let's go." Tatsuya looked at her and asked, "Why are you on my back?" Kurika pressed her breasts against his back and licked his ear and said, "What, don't tell me you don't like the sensation on your back, Naya." Tatsuya blushed a bit and then looked in front and started walking. Kurika, who saw his blush, felt proud of her body. She then started poking his cheek and asked, "By the way, what's your name, Naya? You haven't introduced yourself yet, Naya." Tatsuya came out of the warehouse and looked back at her and said, "My name is Tatsuya Shiba, a human. Nice to meet you." Kurika now saw his face clearly as they were now outside the warehouse and blushed a bit. She regained her composure soon and said, "Nice to meet you as well, Naya." Tatsuya and Kurika kept on talking to each other while Tatsuya was walking back to his restaurant. Kurika suddenly hugged him tighter and asked, "So asking you out of curiosity, why didn't you kill me? Were you mesmerized by my beauty, Naya?" Tatsuya kept silent for a while and said, "Well, I felt no malice from you like I sensed from those guys I killed, and you even spoke the truth, though you were at gunpoint at that time, but still you didn't lie, and you were also able to mask your fear very well, and it was also a waste to kill a cute girl like you without any reason." He then looked back at her and said, "Don't misunderstand though, make a wrong move and you are dead." Kurika didn't said anything and laid out her head on his shoulder and blew in his ear and said, "Oh, I am cute, Naya." Tatsuya shuddered and blushed a bit and said, "Yup, you are, but don't do such a thing again." Kurika smiled mischievously but also felt happy on being called cute by him. On the whole way she kept doing various things to tease Tatsuya, making him blush and feel embarrassed, much to his displeasure. Chapter 32, Scary Miyuki. After reaching their home, Tatsuya put Kurika off his back and then opened the door. As soon as the door opened, he was tackled by a blur. Tatsuya caught the blur and then lifted it up. Tatsuya saw Miyuki, who was looking at him with a cold expression. Before Tatsuya could say anything, Miyuki grabbed his shoulder and started shaking him and said, "Ani-sama, why are you so late? Who are the girls you sent earlier? Am I not enough for you?" Miyuki then looked at Kurika, who was standing behind Tatsuya, seeing all that with an amused expression. Miyuki again looked back at Tatsuya and said, "You brought another girl like the thieving cat here. Why, Ani-sama?" Why? She kept on tightening her grip while shaking him. Tatsuya, who was being shaken, was thinking, "Here we go again." Tatsuya, who had enough of being shaken, held Miyuki's head and gave her a kiss. Miyuki stopped shaking him and started to melt in the kiss. They both were enjoying the moment when suddenly Miyuki was pulled back by Kurumi. Kurumi dragged Miyuki back and said, "That should be enough for now, and don't forget you are not the only lover here." From the side, Himari raised her hand and said, "That's right, there is me too. Now come, Tatsuya, give me a kiss and maybe we can advance further." As soon as she said that, an ice shard grazed her cheek and there was some blood flowing from the cut. A clear tch was heard by all of them. Everyone looked at Miyuki, whose hand was aimed at Himari. She glared at Himari and said, "Oi, thieving cat, listen properly. If someone is going to take Ani-sama's virginity, that would be me." Himari's claws came out and she too glared at Miyuki and said, "Dare to repeat it again," and started to attack Miyuki. Miyuki also didn't stand still and started attacking Himari. They kept on fighting for a while and wrecking the house. Tatsuya sighed in annoyance and started releasing his aura and said in a cold voice, "Stop this right now." All the people who experienced the pressure fell on the ground and were amazed on seeing Tatsuya's power. Both Miyuki and Himari wanted to refute, but when they noticed Tatsuya's glare they shuddered and nodded their heads in approval. Tatsuya stopped releasing his aura, making everyone taking a deep breath simultaneously. Tatsuya looked at Himari and Miyuki and said, "Clean all this mess right now or no dinner for you tonight." Himari looked at him and said, "Hey, I was the one who cooked tonight, how can I not be allowed to eat it?" Tatsuya looked back at her and said, I not clear?" Himari immediately nodded her head fiercely and gave a salute. Tatsuya nodded and said, "Kurumi, how are those two?" Kurumi looked back at him and said, "They both are fine. I have placed them in the guest room, but they both are sleeping right now. They must have a rough day." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Well, whatever, I will interrogate them tomorrow." He then gestured towards Kurika and said, "Well, she is Kurika Aniko Shao. She will be having dinner with us tonight, but if you find her doing anything suspicious, feel free to attack her, but only if you find her acting suspiciously." He said the last part while looking at Miyuki, who averted her eyes. Kurika, who heard him, pulled his hands between her cleavage and said, "You are terrible, Tatsuya. You are saying such mean things even after you did that to me," and started sniffing. Suddenly she felt killing intent aimed at her. Tatsuya also noticed the killing intent and said, "If you don't want to die, I would advise it would be best if you explain them properly." Kurika then looked at the girls and saw them preparing their claws and magic to attack her. Miyuki glared at her and said, "You are trying to seduce Ani-sama. This is very suspicious. I should kill you." Kurika immediately left his hand and did a doxa and explained all the things that happened at the warehouse to them. Kurika was still kneeling down and Miyuki was pointing her sword at her and said, "So you were just tied down by Oni-sama, that's all?" To which Kurika nodded fiercely. Miyuki narrowed her eyes and said, "So you are not trying to seduce him, right?" Kurika looked back at her and said, "Yup, I am not trying to seduce him even though he is handsome, strong, and the body which I felt through his shirt, right?" She started drooling a bit while imaging Tatsuya's body. Miyuki saw that and immediately slashed her. Kurika, who suddenly came back to her senses, dodged the attack and hid behind Tatsuya while holding him tightly and said, "Save me, Tatsuya, she is scary, she will definitely kill me." Before he could say anything, Miyuki came in front of him and said, "Oni-sama, stand aside, I will kill this bitch right now." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Miyuki, language." Miyuki snapped and said, "Fuck the shut up about language right now, I will fucking kill that bitch right now." All the people who looked at her had only one thought: scary. Tatsuya was about to say something but was again interrupted by Kurika, who looked at Miyuki and said, "Hey, it's not my fault, how can one not be enchanted by a body and face like that? It's only natural, even you all like that about him, right?" Kurika lifted Tatsuya's shirt, making everyone present in the room look at him with a blush. Miyuki too lowered her sword and started looking intently at Tatsuya's chiseled body. Tatsuya noticed that everyone was now quiet and said, "Miyuki, leave her for now, I have to ask her some questions and I was also the one who invited her for dinner, so if you kill her it would make me look bad." Miyuki nodded her head and was still blushing. She looked at Kurika and said, "Okay, Oni-sama, I will let her live for now. Hey, you be thankful to Oni-sama's kindness or you would be dead by now." Kurika hurriedly nodded her head and then grabbed Tatsuya's legs and said, "Thank you so much, Tatsuya-sama, because of you I am alive, I will definitely pay you back, you can even use my body however you like." She said the last part by grabbing her boobs. Miyuki started gritting her teeth and said, "I should have known, you should be better off dead." And then again started attacking her. Tatsuya sighed and then looked at Himari and Kurumi. They too looked back at him and as if all of them had the same thought, they left the room without saying anything, making Kurika glare at them. Chapter 33, Interrogation. After all the mess was over, Tatsuya had to prepare the food once again as the food prepared by Himari was ruined during the fight between Miyuki and Kurika. They all had dinner after that and Kurika left and promised to visit him from time to time. The next day after waking up, Tatsuya did his morning workout and then took a bath. After taking a bath, Tatsuya decided to check on his two guests and went towards the guest room. He knocked on the door and said, "I am coming in," and entered the room. Inside the room he saw two girls, one blonde and the other having purple-colored hair, lying on the bed. Koisha turned her head and looked at him and said, "You have no manners or what? You entered the room even before I gave you the permission, what would you do if I was changing my clothes?" Tatsuya looked at her with a neutral expression and said, "First, this is my house so I can go anywhere I want. Second, all your limbs are literally broken, how the hell would you be able to change your clothes?" Koisha, who heard her reasoning, blushed in embarrassment and looked away. Tatsuya didn't give it much thought and said, "Anyway, since you have woken up, I would like to ask you some questions and I hope you cooperate." Koisha looked at him seriously and said, "Okay, ask whatever you want and I will try my best to tell you what you want to know, but like I said before, I am not going to tell you anything way too personal." The atmosphere was turning very serious but was broken when a growl was heard from Koisha's stomach. Tatsuya looked at her, gave a mocking smile. When she saw the smile, her blush deepened and she said, "It's not like that, it's just that I have not eaten anything since yesterday." Tatsuya chuckled a bit and said, "You don't have to be embarrassed about it. Wait for a bit, I will go and get us some breakfast, it's nearly time for that." Tatsuya went out of the room, leaving behind a blushing Koisha who looked at the door for a while and then turned away. Tatsuya came back after a while with some sandwiches and then pulled a chair and sat beside Koisha. He took a sandwich from the plate and moved his hand towards Koisha's mouth. Koisha looked at the sandwich for a while, hesitating. Tatsuya noticed it and took a bite from it and ate it and said, "There's nothing mixed in it, so you don't have to worry about it. Now say ah," and gave a small smile. Koisha wanted to refute him but knew that her hands were broken and she could not eat by herself. She gritted her teeth but still took a bite and immediately got taken aback by the taste. Seeing her pleasant expression, Tatsuya smiled unconsciously, as it always made him happy when others eat his food with a pleasant expression. Koisha looked at the smiling Tatsuya and was mesmerized by him. She kept staring him for a while but regained her consciousness when Tatsuya touched her mouth with a sandwich. She unconsciously took a bite and ate it. After eating for a while she suddenly remembered that she had an indirect kiss with him and immediately blushed. She wanted to complain about it, but when she noticed that Tatsuya wasn't even a slightest bit affected by it, she stopped and didn't said anything. Tatsuya noticed the change in her and used his telepathy to know what she was thinking. When Tatsuya heard her thoughts he sighed and then bowed his head and said, "I am sorry for making you uncomfortable." And then began eating a sandwich himself. Koisha, who heard his apology, smiled and thought, "He isn't that bad." She then came out of her thoughts and said, "So what do you want to ask me?" Tatsuya stopped eating and made a serious expression and said, "I already know your name and that you are a devil. What I want to know is whether you are a stray or not, and why you got involved with those people in the first place, and who is the one beside you." Koisha also adopted a serious expression and said, "No, I am not a stray devil, and I got involved with them while completing a mission for my master." "What mission and who is your master?" asked Tatsuya. Koisha hesitated for a bit and said, "I am the queen of Sororg Bale. You know about the devil piece system, right?" Tatsuya just nodded to her question. Koisha also nodded and said, "You see, someone close to my master is suffering from a similar disease like the girl besides me, and he asked me to check whether the doctors had made some progress about her condition, so I went to check on her, and then you saw her being kidnapped and decided on your own to save her without even knowing how much strong your opponent is. I don't know whether to praise your bravery or ridicule you for your foolishness," interrupted Tatsuya. When Koisha heard him she became angry and wanted to argue, but was again interrupted by Tatsuya, who said, "You didn't even consider anything before considering your actions at all. How would your king would have felt if he came to know that you got harmed because of the mission he sent you on? Hey, do you know how your friends and family would have responded to it?" Tatsuya raised his voice a bit, making Koisha taken aback by shock. She felt sad and discouraged about her actions and was very depressed, but suddenly she felt something on top of her head. She looked up and saw Tatsuya patting her head. She observed him for a while and asked, "What are you doing patting your head?" "No, I am asking you, why are you doing it?" Tatsuya sighed and said, "During all these years I have learned that patting someone's head affectionately is the best way to make them feel better when they are depressed." Tatsuya looked back at her and said, "If you hate it I will stop." Koisha didn't say anything, and Tatsuya smiled and said, "Though you were reckless, I guess you do deserve some praise for saving that girl." Koisha became confused and said, "I didn't save her, you were the one who saved us." Tatsuya smiled at her and said, "But if it weren't for you delaying them, they would have arrived in the town while I was working, and I would have ignored them, and she would be sold to those magicians." Koisha, who was disheartened just a moment ago, smiled and said, "You know what, you are not as bad as I thought you were." Tatsuya didn't said anything and kept on patting her head silently, but suddenly the room got chilled and then both of them heard a voice, "Uni-sama, you are flirting behind my back." Chapter 34, I Can Heal Her. After consoling Miyuki for a while, Tatsuya sighed in relief. He again looked back at Koisha, who was looking at him and was appreciating his help. She was feeling that she just dodged a bullet and was very grateful to Tatsuya. Tatsuya thought for a while and then said, "Koisha, it would take a while for you to recover, so if you want you can stay here for the time being." Koisha shook her head and said, "No, there is no need for that, just remove the restraints and I will contact my master." This time Tatsuya shook his head and said, "Sorry, I cannot do that, because even if I trust you a bit, but you are still a devil and I don't know what would be the intentions of your master and the other devils after knowing about us." Koisha wanted to say that her master wasn't like that, but thinking from Tatsuya's point of view she realized that what he said was true. She then sighed and said, "Then what about this girl? She is in need of medical treatment and should be sent to the underworld for that." Tatsuya looked at her weirdly for a while and then said, "Are you really stupid or what? The girl beside you is a Leviathan, a descendant of an original Mu. Do you really think that some mere low-class devils could kidnap her for selling her that easily?" Suddenly realization hit her and she looked at Tatsuya with widened eyes and said, "You mean to say that she was being sold by the higher-ups from the Devil Society?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "Yeah, that's what I am saying. You must have noticed it as well, right? Something like no surveillance cameras in her ward or no guards around her room." Koisha thought for a while and then nodded her head and said, "Yeah, just like you said, while I was visiting her I didn't see any guards there." Tatsuya sighed and said, "You devils really are twisted." Well, anyways, she must have been sold as she was not useful to them, as they cannot extract any information from her as she was unconscious, and sustain her medical bills must be draining them, so she was sold in order to fill those bills, I guess. Koisha was enraged at the higher-ups but knew that she couldn't do anything about it. She didn't have any evidence about it against them. She gave a tired sigh and said, Nonetheless, it doesn't solve the matter of her needing medical care at all. What should we do about that? Tatsuya didn't said anything and went towards Ingvild and grabbed his hand and closed his eyes. Koisha looked at him intently and was wondering what he was doing. Soon Tatsuya opened his eyes and said, I can cure her, so that problem solved. She just needs some magic, that's all. It might take a day or two depending on how much magic her body can take at a time. When Koisha heard him, her eyes lit up. She looked at him expectantly. Tatsuya noticed her looking at him and asked, what? Koisha didn't hesitate and asked, if you are able to heal her, can you check on the other person that I talked about? Tatsuya remained silent and thought, helping Sarayorg now would mean exposing devils about my presence and all of that will be very annoying if they start to pester us to join their peerages, not to mention there are too many perverts and womanizers among the devils. Koisha started to get worried as Tatsuya remained silent. She thought that Tatsuya was going to deny her request. While she thought that Tatsuya was thinking about the pros and cons of revealing himself and finally decided to help him and thought, if they become too much of a nuisance then there would be one less faction in this world. Just hope that they don't go on my bad side for their own safety. He looked back at Koisha and said, okay, I will help her, but make sure that the people on your side don't annoy me too much, otherwise I cannot promise about their well-being. Tatsuya just gave a smile, making Koisha shudder on thinking what he did that night in the warehouse. She nodded her head and said, I promise that I will make sure to let them know about it, and I thank you a lot for accepting my request. Tatsuya then looked back at Ingvild and started transferring his magic to her and could feel that her sacred gear was absorbing all that energy. He sighed and then sent a telepathic message to the others and told them about his talk with Koisha and also asked them to not slack on their training, making them complain, but accepted immediately when he promised them to take them on a date. Tatsuya sighed, but he also felt happy that Miyuki and the others loved him a lot. He had decided that whoever tried to interfere him or the others in the future would only suffer their own doom by his hands. He has the power and he would use it against others if they stand in his way. He then looked back at the girls present in the room and saw that both of them are sleeping peacefully. He looked at Koisha and thought, even though I am not a guy who take advantages of others while they are asleep, but to sleep so defenseless when there is a guy in the room. He smiled at her and thought, well, let's not break her faith in me. He closed his eyes and laid back in a relaxed position with a satisfied look on his face, but suddenly his expression changed to that of panic and thought, shit. Sira will annoy me way too much once she will know that I am a part of the supernatural world. Man, I only hope that she don't get mad at me. Well, if that situation comes I will use Sana as a bait, I guess, and shrugged his shoulder and went back to sleep. Somewhere in the underworld at two different locations, two girls suddenly sneezed. Seraphils thought, what's this? Did Sotan is thinking about me, or it could be Tatsuya as well. Now that I think about it, he has grown a lot since then and he is much handsome now. If Sotan doesn't make her move fast then I guess I would take him instead, but there is Miyuki and the others too. Oh well, it doesn't matter, I just have to somehow convince Miyuki, I guess. I will ask her when I visit them next time. Sana's thought, that guy Tatsuya must be thinking about something, setting me up again. Sigh, well, whatever, I will face it when I visit him next time. Come to think of it, I have not visited him from a long time. I want to play chess with him again, it's very boring staying here all the time. Last time was also a draw, but I was barely able to turn the tables or he would have won. Maybe this time he could defeat me. Wait, but if he defeats me then? Sana started blushing and Tsubaki, who saw him, asked, Sana-sama, are you again thinking about Tatsuya? Sana's blush deepened and she said, no, why would I think about that idiot? Tsubaki smiled at her antics and said, I would like to meet him the next time you visit. To be able to make the cold sauna like this, he must be something. Sana averted her eyes and said, I don't like him at all, do you understand? Tsubaki came in front of her and smirked and said, oh, but I didn't said anything about liking him. Steam seemed to come out of Sana's head and she glared at Tsubaki and shouted, there's nothing like that. Chapter 35, Can't she do it in one go? After supplying his magic to Ingvild for a whole day, there was still no change in her body condition. Tatsuya sighed and was wondering how much more magical power would the sacred gear consume. Koisha, who was also in the room, was now wondering whether Tatsuya was telling her the truth about knowing a way to cure Ingvild or not, but decided to believe him as she had a bit confidence in him. Tatsuya was getting bored from sitting all the time and decided to talk with Koisha, to which she complied as she too was feeling bored. She started to tell him about her family, friends and master. She even told him about the things from which her master went through. Hearing about Sareorg, Tatsuya felt a bit sad for him, but not too much, as he knew that life could be very cruel. In the past even Miyuki was left homeless by her relatives, who broke all the ties with him and her, and they only belonged to a normal human family, so Sareorg's case was not too astonishing to him, as he was an aristocrat family among the devils, and not being up to the mark in their eyes would have certainly led him to such a fate. Despite all this, Tatsuya had a good impression of him from all the things that Koisha had told Tatsuya about Sareorg. Even by driving him to a corner and not being able to use his family's heritage magic, he didn't get disheartened and decided to make a path for himself and show others that he is not worthless. That type of thinking made Tatsuya feel that he was very admirable, and now he wanted to meet him soon. Koisha, who heard Tatsuya praise her master, felt proud and also thought that Tatsuya was not like others who would either feel pity or would feel that her master was worthless. She was even shocked by the type ideology that Tatsuya had. She talked some more to Tatsuya and even started asking questions herself, and when she come to know that he was a leading novelist and mangaka, she was very excited. She too was a fan of his work and went into a complete fan mode after that. After hours of questions and answers between Tatsuya and Koisha was over, Tatsuya gave a tired sigh. He had now decided not to tell about his profession about a novelist or a mangaka to anyone. He was glad that she was not a die-hard otaku, or he would have been way too tired. Tatsuya left the room after a while and decided to relax for a bit. He has been transferring his magical power for a whole day, and seeing that it would take a bit more time for her to wake up, he postponed the treatment for later. He then went out in the town for a stroll, visiting various places along the way. While walking, many girls were looking at him with lust, which Tatsuya just ignored. He has been experienced it now and now knows that the best way in these sort of situations is to just ignore them. He was also a bit happy, as he knew that his looks were good and he felt proud about it. He unconsciously smiled while thinking that, and all the females started to blush even more, some of them even had nosebleeds when they looked at him. Tatsuya then felt killing intent aimed at him from all the directions, and he got out of daze. He then looked around and saw all the males glaring at him. Tatsuya was confused for a bit, but then he looked at some females blushing. He sighed and thought, so that's what the killing intent was. Hey, it's not my fault that I look good. I know that this is an anime world, but still jealousy in this world is on another level. He then looked at old man couple looking at him, and Tatsuya stiffened on seeing their expression. He looked at the old man. Oi 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 Gigi, why are you glaring at me like all these worthless younger men? And he then looked at the old woman beside the man who looked like his wife and thought, why the hell is that hag winking at me? He then looked at the old man again, who gave him a smug smile on seeing Tatsuya's reaction and showed Tatsuya his middle finger. Tatsuya's lips twitched and he mouthed a fuck you and then walked away. Tatsuya was continued his stroll around the city, but then he suddenly felt some supernatural disturbance. He sighed and thought, seriously, this town has a lot of problems, and why is she involved in this again? She just visited the town a few days ago. What is her work this time? Can't she do it in one go? He increased his pace and started to search for an alley. Finally seeing one, he instantly entered it and teleported to the location. Chapter 36, It really is an anime world. After teleporting nearby to the location, he started walking towards the source. As he started to get nearby, he felt a barrier preventing him from entering. He shrugged his shoulders and entered the field. After walking for a while, he started noticing some magic attacks being fired. He started walking faster, and once he saw his acquaintance, Kurika, he stopped and looked at fight taking place in front of him. He decided to observe them for a while and created a sofa for himself and sat down in a relaxed position with a soft drink in his hand, which he took out from his dimension pocket. He was casually sipping on his drink while enjoying the fight taking place in front of him. While he was looking at the fight, he thought, she really lives up to her tilty of a SS class stray devil, but both Himari and Miyuki can also fight on par with her if they fight together. Though it would be a different case if I told them that I would reward them if they are able to beat her. Miyuki might even defeat her alone in such condition. At the same moment in Shiba house. Miyuki, achoo. What is this? Did I catch a cold? No. It must be Onii-sama thinking about me. Kyaa. He thinks about me even when he is away from me. He really loves me a lot. Suddenly Himari and Kurumi barged into the room and shouted at the same time, shut up, it's the middle of the night. And why the hell are you sleeping in Tatsuya's room? Tatsuya continued to observe the fight, then he suddenly noticed something on the field and thought, ho, a sneak attack, and disappeared from his sofa. The next moment he appeared on the field and punched two guys present near him and said, you should watch your back as well. Kurika, who recognized the voice, got surprised and turned around and looked at Tatsuya in astonishment. The others present on the field were also surprised and were wondering who the new entry was. Kurika looked at him for a while and then latched onto him and hugged him like a koala and looked up and asked, "Tatsuya Naya, when did you arrive here? Did you come here to save me, Naya?" Tatsuya looked back at her and said, "Oh, I was here for a while and was watching your fight from there," and pointed his finger in the sofa's direction. Everyone present there turned their heads and looked in that direction and saw a sofa present there, and all of them had a sweat drop. Kurika looked back at him with widened eyes and asked, "You were watching me fight?" "Yep," Tatsuya replied. "And you didn't even try to help me?" asked Kurika. Tatsuya gave him a small smile and placed his hands on both of her cheeks. Kurika got in daze and was about lean forward for a kiss, but suddenly her cheeks were pulled. Tatsuya looked at her with a smile and asked, "What the hell are you doing in the town?" replied Kurika with unclear words as her cheeks were being pulled. Tatsuya smiled, didn't wavered, and he asked, "What I am asking is, what business did you have in the town when you just visited a few days ago?" Kurika, who now understood his question, widened her eyes and said, "I see he to tall uabo sumhi. I came here to talk to you about something." Tatsuya somehow understood her and asked, "And what would that be?" Kurika was about to answer him, but Tatsuya stopped her and said, "Wait, we will talk after all this is over," and released her. Kurika, who got released, grabbed her red and swelled cheeks and said with some tears in her eyes and said, "Tatsuya Naya, you are very mean. How can you do this to me?" Tatsuya snorted and said, "You are asking me how can I do this to you? You are asking me how can I do this to you? Because of people like those guys," while pointing at her attackers. "A part of my day is always packed with exterminating these things, and today I was already very tired and didn't wanted to do an extermination today, but you have to be involved in today's situation. Why the hell is my life so messed up?" Tatsuya stopped his ranting and started to breathe heavily. He took out some water from his storage and started drinking. While he was drinking, Kurika looked intently at him and asked, "Then do you mean that you only came because I was involved and could have gotten hurt?" Tatsuya stopped drinking and looked at her weirdly and asked, "Why the hell are you asking that question? Isn't that obvious? I didn't came here to look after those guys, though being worried about you might be too much." Kurika's lips twitched on hearing his answer, but then she smiled and looked at him and asked, "Nay Tatsuya, can I ask something from you?" Tatsuya looked back at her and asked, "What?" Kurika's smile widened and she asked excitedly, "Will you make kittens with me, Naya?" As soon as she said that, Tatsuya knocked her head with his fist and said, "Do you really think that it is the right time to ask such a thing?" He then looked at the others and said, "And why the hell are you guys standing there silently? Do you have brains or not? You should be attacking us or should be planning an attack, at least you degenerates." Tatsuya gave a heavy sigh and thought, it really is an anime world. Chapter 37, Worthless Human. The people present there who were attacking Kurika earlier were silently watching the interaction between the SS class stray devil and the newcomer human. They were then brought back from their stupor by the human insulting them. The leader of those men got angry and said, "Why, you shitty human! How dare you call us devil degenerates?" We were waiting silently because he paused for a while thinking about something and said, "Because we were giving you some consideration as this will be your last time talking." "Yeah, that's why, right guys?" The others who heard his excuse were looking at him with an expression which said, seriously, but nonetheless his subordinates agreed to his claim. Tatsuya sighed in annoyance and said, "You know what, I am not in the mood right now, so why don't you go back silently without causing any troubles and we can just leave it as it is." After saying that, Tatsuya thought, following the anime cliché, these men will now start to insult me and then will then spout some shit about killing me and all, and taking Kurika along with them. The devils heard him and snorted. Tatsuya just sighed and thought, here it comes. The leader then came forward and said, "Human, you think you are some tough shit or what? Yeah, you are just a worthless human. Why would we follow your orders, human? Yeah, we can kill a human like you anytime we want. You humans are just like some slaves to us devils. Yeah, human, and after taking your worthless human life we will take that stray devil with us. We can even have some fun with her before killing her as well." Tatsuya, who heard them speaking nonsense, looked at them blankly and said, "Aren't you guys saying human a lot?" The devils looked at each other and then looked back at Tatsuya and said, "Yeah, so what?" Tatsuya looked at them with a deadpan expression and said, "Nothing." He then looked at them lazily and said, "You guys think that you can kill me easily because I am a worthless human?" The devil leader, who heard him, grinned and said, "Yeah, we can kill you anytime we want." Tatsuya sighed and said, "I am not in the mood of this, but whatever." He then looked at them seriously and said, I will show you the technique of a real worthless human. Any guesses on whose technique he will use? Tatsuya then started walking towards them and stopped after a while such that there was some distance between them. The devils who saw him started laughing and said, "What are you scared of us? Want to go back to your mommy?" And then started laughing louder. Tatsuya then took a deep breath and then took a stance. He then looked at his opponents and suddenly shouted, "Wolf Fang Fist!" and started attacking them at inhuman speed. The devils who were laughing were suddenly attacked and got serious. They wanted to counterattack him but he was too fast for them. They could only helplessly see themselves and their comrades getting flown away by the boy whom they had underestimated. After all of them were flown away, Tatsuya stopped and said in a disappointed tone, "As expected, some of them are still alive even after I put a bit of strength in my attacks." As he said that, the devils who were still alive started getting up, looked at him with rage and said, "We will definitely kill you for killing our comrades, you brat!" and started firing magic at him. Tatsuya, who saw the attacks coming towards him, just slapped the projectiles away with the back of his hand. He then looked at his opponents and suddenly got an idea and thought, "Well, let's test that out while I am at it." Tatsuya then took something like a handle and held it and said, "Let's check this baby out." He then moved his hand to the side and said, "Neo Cerberista activate," and then a sword with a purple energy blade materialized. Tatsuya admired his sword and thought, though it looks like a normal Cerberista, it actually is made by combination of swords. It has of course the Cerberista * war, Fujigen world trigger, Organon world trigger, Yamato not the devil trigger, though only the space and time manipulation. Devil may cry, and it can even alter its size and form. The others who saw the sword were surprised but not much, but there was feeling of dread coming from the sword. Tatsuya then held his sword and moved his hand, said, "Now let the party begin," and then started running towards his opponents. The devils who saw him running towards them started to take a defensive stance, but some of them were late and were instantly cut by his sword. Tatsuya stopped and looked at his sword and said, "It cuts very easily and smoothly, I like it." Suddenly some of the devils attacked him with a sword and he blocked them with his sword and said with an amused tone, "Ho, trying to copy me, I am so flattered." But his tone changed immediately to serious and he said, "But that will still not be enough." He pushed them back with his sword and then suddenly the blade of the sword turned green and he said, "Fusion." As soon as he said that, multiple very long green blades came out from the ground and slashed at his enemies, cutting them with ease. All the remaining devils who saw that were frightened beyond comprehension and wanted to run away, but Tatsuya looked at them with a huge smile on his face and said, "You can't escape," and held his sword up and the blade of the sword turned white and he shouted, "Organon." Various blades materialized around him in an orbit with him being at the center. Tatsuya then looked back at his opponent and said, "Bye," and the blades started revolving very fast, cutting all of them quickly and silently. Tatsuya then deactivated his sword and then looked at the handle and said, "This is amazing, but I was still not able to use the last ability. Oh well, the time for that will come as well." And then stored it back. Chapter 38, Kurika's Confession. After killing everyone in the area except Kurika, Tatsuya gave a tired sigh. He was about to turn around but suddenly he felt two soft sensations on his back. He stayed still and silent for a while and then said, "Although I do like the feeling of your boobs on my back, keep in mind that if Miyuki found about this you would be up for a whole lot of trouble." Tatsuya could have sworn that when he mentioned about Miyuki he felt that Kurika's body shuddered but came back to normal soon. Kurika, who was hugging Tatsuya from behind, suddenly bit his ear slightly and said, "You didn't answer my question, you know." On hearing her, Tatsuya sighed and said, "Are you serious about that? We have literally met each other just a few days ago and only once. Don't you think that I could be a bad guy and could kill you, a stray devil, for a reward from the devils?" Kurika, who heard him, smiled and then hugged him tightly and said, "Well, I am seriously asking you to make kittens with me, Naya, as you are strong." Tatsuya, who heard her, asked in a neutral tone, "So your only reason for asking me that because of my power?" Kurika could tell that even though Tatsuya was calm from outside, from the inside he was a bit angry. She blew some air in his ear and said, "Also, I don't feel any hostility from you, and before you say something I can tell a person's emotion towards me using senjutsu, and even if you were somehow hiding your emotions, we both know that how easily you could kill me. You even came here to see whether I was safe or not." She then stopped hugging him and came in front of him and bent a little and asked, "So I am asking you again, will you make kittens with me, Naya?" Tatsuya remained neutral and hit her head with his fist and said, "If you have time to fool around, better start explaining why you came here." Kurika, who was hit by him, had some tears formed at the corner of her eyes, and she said, "Why are you hitting me, Naya, and you still didn't give me an answer? You should not be rude to women, especially those who confessed to you, Naya." She then humphed and then pouted. Tatsuya, who saw her pout, couldn't help but blush and thought cute. He sighed and patted her head and said, "I will answer your question later, as I don't have that kind of feelings for you yet." Kurika, who was enjoying his hand patting her head, was purring unconsciously and said, "Okay, I will leave it for later, but I will keep on trying till you accept me, Naya." Tatsuya, who heard her, looked at her and asked, "Then what would you do if you found someone stronger than me? Will you ask him the same thing as well?" Kurika, who heard him, pretended to be angry and said with a pout, "How rude, I am not a woman like that." Tatsuya didn't said anything and poked her cheeks. She stared at him and Tatsuya stared back. They remained silent for a while and then Tatsuya asked, "So what would you do?" Kurika looked at him for a while and said, "If that happens, then I would wait till you become stronger than that guy and will then ask you again, Naya." Tatsuya chuckled and then asked, "And what if I would not be able to surpass him?" Hearing his question, Kurika thought for a while and then said, "Then I would get stronger myself, Naya, and would kill that guy, and then you would be the strongest guy left." Tatsuya looked at her with a blank expression for a while and then both of them burst out laughing. After laughing for a while, Tatsuya sat on the ground and supported himself with his hands. Kurika, who saw him sitting, sat on his lap and said in low voice, "I will keep on pestering you till you agree to make kittens with me, Naya, so you should be ready for that in future, or you can simply agree to my request." Tatsuya remained silent for a while and closed his eyes. After a while he opened his eyes and said, "My answer still remains the same, but who knows what the future have in store for me." Kurika, who heard him, turned around and gave him a passionate kiss, which Tatsuya returned to her as well. She then separated and said, "Okay, I will wait till that time, Naya." Tatsuya touched his lips unconsciously and he would have to admit it that her lips felt soft. He then looked back at her and asked, "If you agreed to that, then why did you kiss me just now?" Kurika looked at him with a mischievous expression and said, "What? I did agree on waiting on having kittens with you, but that does not mean that I am holding back on anything else, Naya. And you know what?" She licked her lips lustfully and said, "I really enjoyed that, Naya, so you should be careful, as I would definitely attack you every now and then." Tatsuya, who heard her, sighed and said, "You should not get your hopes up though, even the residents of the Shiba house have a hard time doing that and could only accomplish it when I either let my guard down, which is very rare, or I allow it myself." Kurika, who heard him, smirked and said, "Heh, we will see about that," and again moved forward for a kiss. But just as she was about to touch his lips, Tatsuya stood up, phasing through her body using Kamui, and said, "I told you, didn't I? Don't get your hopes up." Kurika looked back at him with an annoyed expression and said, "That's not fair, Naya, you slipped through my body. I was just out to kiss you. Come and just kiss me on your own, Naya." Tatsuya gave a tired sigh but then gave a rare smile. Kurika, who felt his emotions through her senjutsu, also smiled and thought, "We will have a lot of kittens in the future, Naya, but I will have to deal with that Miyuki person first, Naya." Tatsuya, who heard her through his telepathy, smiled wryly and thought, "I just hope that Miyuki don't kill everyone though. It would be very troublesome." Chapter 39, Vala Team. After Kurika got out of her thoughts, Tatsuya looked at her seriously and asked, "Kurika, now I would expect you to tell me the reason for coming here and be serious now." Hearing him, Kurika also got serious and said, "I came here on behalf of my leader, he wants to meet you." And Kurika was about to continue, but Tatsuya interrupted her and said, "If this is about joining your group, then forget it. You know better than anyone that your group is a terrorist group, and even though you don't have any ill intentions, you would still not be trusted by the major powers of the world and would most likely face a lot of trouble. The most problematic part among all this is that your family also gets involved in all this somehow, and I don't plan on having them go through all that shit." Hearing his answer, Kurika sighed and said, "At the very least, can you meet them? They were very interested in you and would like to meet you personally." Tatsuya remained silent and thought for a while, and finally, coming at a conclusion, turned towards her and asked, "Okay, when do you want me to meet them?" Before Kurika could answer, a voice interrupted her and said, "How about now?" Both Tatsuya and Kurika turned their heads and saw 5 people standing over a magic circle. There were 3 males, one with silver hair, one blonde with glasses, and one with brown hair. There were also 2 girls present there as well. One of them was blonde and was wearing a magician's cape and hat, and the other a loli with black hair. Tatsuya looked at all of them and gave a tired sigh and thought, why are all this shit taking place today? I just wanted to relax for fuck's sake. While Tatsuya was internally ranting, the new party who just came started walking towards them. Seeing them approach her and Tatsuya, Kurika came forward and asked, "Why did you all come? Didn't you all promise that you will not interfere me today?" The male with brown hair wearing a Chinese armor came forward with his staff on his shoulder and said, "You were taking too long, so we came to check on you. We thought that you might be in some sort of trouble, but you look just fine." Kurika looked back at the person and said, "Shut up, Baikao. And there was indeed some trouble, her more appropriately some devils came to capture me, but I got saved by Tatsuya Naya." And grabbed his hand and placed it between her breasts. Just as she placed his hand between her boobs, Tatsuya came out of his stupor and then looked back at the others, but he looked more intently at the silver-haired man and the black-haired loli. The loli, or more clearly Off-Eyes, stared back at Tatsuya and thought, "I cannot see through him or judge his strength. Well, if he could help me defeat Baka Red, then I don't care." Tatsuya, who heard her through telepathy, smiled inwardly. He freed his hand from Kurika and walked towards Off-Eyes and stopped in front of her. Everyone was looking at him with wide eyes except for Vala, who was smirking and thought, "Interesting." Tatsuya then formed a chocolate bar in his hand, opened the wrapper and moved his hand towards her. Off-Eyes just looked at the bar and then back at Tatsuya with a blank expression. Seeing her reaction, Tatsuya realized something and then broke a block from the bar and then ate it. Off-Eyes, who saw what he was doing, smelled the chocolate and after realizing what he was doing opened her mouth. Seeing her opening her mouth, Tatsuya took a block and placed it near her mouth and Off-Eyes took it instantly. Imagine Off-Eyes in place of Kana Kamui eating the chocolate from Kobayashi's hand. Tatsuya, who saw her eating chocolate, cutely petted her head. Though Off-Eyes was confused by this, but she didn't stop him. She even felt good when he rubbed her head, but she had a blank expression on her face. While Tatsuya was busy with petting Off-Eyes, the others were looking at him with shock. They all had the same thought while looking at him: why the hell is he treating a dragon god like some child, and why is Off-Eyes just accepting all that? Vala was the first one to calm down among his team. He then looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Are you quite done with that?" Hearing him, his team members too came out of shock and looked at Tatsuya. Tatsuya looked at Vala and asked in a neutral tone, what Vala was a bit surprised by his neutral expression but didn't said anything and said, "Nice to meet you, my name is Vala and this is my team. I heard from my teammate Kurika that you were very strong and wanted to meet you." Tatsuya looked at him and said, "Nice to meet you as well, I am Tatsuya," he said neutrally, making Vala a bit pissed. Just as he was about to speak, Baikao interrupted him and said, "Oi Kurika, is he really the one you were talking about? This guy looks very weak to me." Tatsuya looked at Baikao with a deadpan expression and pointed at Off-Eyes, "Oi monkey boy, stop judging by looks. This loli here can destroy you along with all your ancestors without even moving an inch." Hearing his answer, Kurika started laughing loudly along with Arthur and Le Fei, who were trying very hard to control their laughter. Baikao looked at his teammates and then at Off-Eyes, who was eating chocolate with a blank look on her face. He sighed and said, "When you put it that way, it does make sense. By the way, the name's Baikao, hope we get along well." And moved his hand forward. Tatsuya looked at him and asked, "Do you like to lie down doing nothing and just relaxing?" Hearing him, Baikao grinned and said, "More than anything." Tatsuya also grinned and shook his hand and said, "Looks like our tastes match, my friend." Vala looked at both of them and said, "That's enough, Baikao. Sorry about that, but still I too don't think that you are very powerful. By the way, these are my other teammates, Arthur and Le Fei of the Pendragon family." Hearing their introduction, Arthur bowed a bit while Le Fei just waved her hand. Tatsuya also bowed in response. He then looked back at Vala and said, "Vala, right?" Vala nodded in response. Tatsuya also nodded and said, "You know what, Vala? In a war, the most dangerous enemy is not the one who you know is very powerful, but the one who you cannot tell about at all. Ain't I right, the great white dragon of supremacy?" As soon as he said that, blue wings materialized on Vala's back, the wings shined and a voice came from them and said, "Ho, a human able to feel my presence? Hey, I am impressed." "Indeed you are right, human, and by the looks of it you seem like a person hiding a lot of his strength." Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Who knows, maybe I am, maybe not." Just as he was about to speak any further, his shirt was tugged by someone. Tatsuya turned around and saw Off-Eyes looking at him. He too looked at her and asked, "What?" Off-Eyes' expression didn't waver and she said, "Human, defeat Baka Red for me." Chapter 40, Friend. Tatsuya stared at Off-Eyes for a while and then said, "What?" Off-Eyes, who heard him, stood still and said, "Kill Bakared for me." Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan expression for a while and then turned to the other and said, "What does she mean by that?" Though Tatsuya knew about what she was talking about, he pretended that he didn't know about it. Off-Eyes was about to say what she said earlier, but before she could, Tatsuya took a block of chocolate and fed it to her. Off-Eyes simply ate the chocolate that Tatsuya gave her and didn't said anything. The others who saw that had a sweat drop and were thinking how easily Tatsuya was able to tame the dragon god. After a while, Arthur gave a fake cough and said, "What Lady Off-Eyes means to convey is that she wants you to help her in defeating Great Red, the true dragon, or the Dragon of Dreams. That is also the sole purpose of her in forming the group Chaos Brigade." Tatsuya looked at them blankly for a while and then looked at Off-Eyes and said, "Why do you want to defeat Great Red?" Off-Eyes looked back at him and said, "He took my silence away and I want it back." Hearing her answer, Tatsuya gave an annoyed sigh and then looked at the others. As if getting what he was asking, Arthur adjusted his glasses and said, "You see, Off-Eyes used to live in the dimensional gap, but one day Great Red also arrived in the gap and started living there. Though at first she didn't minded it, but as the years passed by she started to get annoyed by the dragon and now wants to move her away from her home." Tatsuya nodded in understanding and said, "Though I understand your reason for your request, but I humbly decline it." He then looked back at Off-Eyes with an apologetic expression and patted her head and said, "Sorry." Though Off-Eyes was enjoying the petting, she looked at Tatsuya and tilted her head and asked, "Why?" Tatsuya, who saw her tilt her head, thought cute but soon shook his thoughts away. He crouched down to her level and said, "You see, I am not interested in fighting that much, I just want to enjoy my life, and joining you will not give me that." Off-Eyes stared at him and asked, "Even though you can get a lot of power from me?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "Yes, even though you can give me a lot of power which I can easily create with skill creation, I will still not join you." After listening to his answer, Off-Eyes looked blankly at him for a while but was brought out of her stupor when Tatsuya took another block of chocolate and placed it on her mouth and said, "Though we can still be friends, right?" Off-Eyes unconsciously took the chocolate and then asked, "Friend?" Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Yes, friend, after all it is better to be on each other's good side, or is it that you don't want to meet me again?" Off-Eyes shook her head and asked, "Will you give me more of that?" while pointing at the chocolate, "if we became friends?" Hearing him, Tatsuya and the others except Vala started laughing. After controlling his laughter a bit later, Tatsuya looked at Off-Eyes and said, "Of course I would give you lots of chocolates. So friends?" and moved his hand forward. Off-Eyes took his hand and shook it and said, "Friends." Tatsuya shook her hand for a while and then stood up and said, "Well, I think it's very late, I should be heading home now." Tatsuya turned around to leave, but suddenly he felt someone tugging his shirt from behind. Tatsuya turned around and saw Off-Eyes tugging it and asked, "What happened?" Off-Eyes, still in her emotionless tone, asked, "You leaving?" Tatsuya gave a small smile and patted her head and said, "Sorry, I have to go now, but we can meet each other later. After all, we are friends, and whenever you want to meet me, just ask Kurika and she will bring you with her." Off-Eyes nodded and let go of his shirt. Tatsuya again turned around to leave but was again stopped, this time by Vala. "Hey, wait, before you go, how about we have a spar? I also want to see whether you are as strong as Kurika tells you are or not." Tatsuya gave a tired sigh and said, "Look, I am very tired today and I am not in the mood to fight, so just leave, all right?" Hearing him, Vala snorted and said, "You cannot be that tired, those devils you just fought must only be small fries, seeing that even your clothes are completely clean." Tatsuya looked back at him with a neutral look and said, "You didn't hear my conversation with Off-Eyes, I guess. Didn't you hear I am not interested in fighting? I even rejected the chance to fight the Great Red, so what makes you think that I will agree to fighting you?" Vala got a bit angry and then gave an evil smile and said, "If you only require motivation to fight me, how about I kill your fam?" Just as he was about to say anything further, he was thrown away by an invisible force at an insane speed and he crashed through 10 walls, turning them into rubble in the process. His teammates were very shocked on seeing that. Even Off-Eyes was a bit surprised by it. They all looked back at Tatsuya, whose hand was aimed in Vala's direction. Tatsuya looked coldly in Vala's direction and asked in a cold voice, "I didn't quite hear you, wanna say it again?" Chapter 41, Tatsuya vs Vala. Seeing his coldness, everyone was shocked except Off-Eyes. Even Kurika was very surprised on seeing the cold and angry look on Tatsuya's face. All the members of the Vala team came out of shock and took their stance. Though they all were a bit scared, but they still resolved themselves to fight him. Noticing them taking their stance, Tatsuya turned in their direction and said, I don't think that it is necessary, and in my opinion you guys should lower your weapons before my hand slips by mistake. That would not be very pleasurable. For you at least. All of them gulped simultaneously but got serious and were about to attack him, but suddenly they all heard, "Don't interfere, it's my fight." Vala came out of the rubble completely covered in dust and some visible injuries. Seeing him come out, Tatsuya whistled and said, "You survived that, hey? You are tougher than I thought." Hearing him, Vala snorted and his sacred gear appeared on his back and he started rushing in Tatsuya's direction. He approached him quickly and punched his face. Dust covered the scene from all the wind generated by the wind created by Vala flying towards it at inhuman speed. All the members of the Vala team except Kurika grinned, but as the dust cleared all of them widened their eyes and everyone including Vala was shocked. Tatsuya was just standing at his position holding Vala's fist with his hand without taking any damage at all. He grinned and said, "You pack quite a punch, don't you?" He then started crushing his fist making Vala groan in pain and said, "But that's still not enough." Tatsuya's hand then started glowing and then Vala was suddenly covered in a ki sphere and Tatsuya launched him away. After sent flying in the air, the orb exploded making his teammates look at Vala in worry. Tatsuya didn't stop there and formed a large ki orb and fired it in Vala's direction. Just as the orb was about to hit Vala, a cut in the space in front of him appeared and the orb went through it. After a while there was an explosion seen at some distance making Vala and Tatsuya looked in that direction. "Vala, you okay?" Baikao asked his friend making him turn and look at him. Tatsuya also looked at them and saw Arthur holding a sword in his hand which was glowing and was emitting a holy aura. Vala also saw that and became angry and shouted, "Don't interfere, it's my fight." But I said don't interfere." Seeing that they looked conflicted in approving his order. Tatsuya saw that and said, "Don't worry, I will not kill him, I will just make him understand that he should not anger someone who is out of his league." Hearing him they all sighed in relief. Tatsuya then looked at Arthur and said, "By the way, nice sword you got there." Arthur lifted up his sword and said, "Thank you, this here is a fragment of the holy sword Excalibur ruler, comes with the power of manipulating space." Tatsuya looked amused and said, "Hey, that's a very handy sword. I guess I should get one as well." Trace on. Tatsuya scanned the sword and then a second later a similar copy of the sword was in his hand. Seeing that all of them were very shocked. Arthur was looking between the sword in his hand and the sword in Tatsuya's. He was very confused and thinking whether the sword in his hand was real or not. Tatsuya gave the sword a few practice swings and then said, "Vala, ready or not, but here I come." He then started storing magic energy in the sword and then waved it in Vala's direction. A huge wave of holy energy was sent in his direction. Seeing the wave coming in his direction, Vala too didn't stood still and used his sacred gear. Divide was clearly heard by everyone. His wings started glowing and Vala said, "Looks like I have to get serious if I want to defeat you." Then his and Albion's voices combined and shouted, "Vanishing dragon, balance breaker." And then Vala was covered in a white dragonic armor with huge blue translucent wings. While this was all going on, Tatsuya was looking at the sword in his hand and thought, "Not very impressive, looks like I expected too much from just a fragment." He then looked at the armor-cladded Vala and smirked and said while putting the sword away, "Whoa, your armor looks very cool." Vala smirked inside his helmet and said, "Behold the power of a Longinus, a sacred gear with the power of killing even gods, and now you will face your doom with that same power." While Vala was doing his Chiyuni stuff, Tatsuya silently activated his trace on. When Vala finished his speech, Tatsuya looked at him and said, "Hearing your talk so high and mighty about your armor, I guess it really packs some serious punch." Vala smirked and then said, "Of course, you should not expect anything less from a Longinus class sacred gear." Tatsuya smirked as well and then said, "Then how about this vanishing dragon, balance breaker?" And Tatsuya too was covered in an armor similar to that of Vala. While Tatsuya was checking out the armor, the others were looking at him in shock except for Off-Eyes, who only got a bit surprised but shrugged it off her mind soon. Vala's mouth was open wide inside his armor and he was shocked beyond comprehension. Soon he came out of his shock and then asked Albion, "Albion, is his armor a real deal or it's just similar to yours only in appearance?" Albion remained silent for a while and then said, "I don't know, partner." Vala widened his eyes and asked, "What do you mean by you don't know?" Hearing his partner's question, Albion sighed and said, "I mean I cannot feel a presence similar to me in his armor, but at the same time his armor feels like it is the same. I don't know how to clarify it." Vala looked serious for a while and then grinned and said, "If you don't know then there is only one way to find out." He said the and started flying towards Tatsuya, but just as he flew for a bit he was punched in the gut and he heard, "Not so fast," and was then one again thrown away. Tatsuya, who had familiarized himself with the armor, saw Vala coming in his direction and then immediately teleported towards him and punched him in the gut. He then looked at his hand and then opened and closed his fist and said to himself, "This one is pretty good and it still have the potential to grow further, I guess I could use it a bit in future." Vala maintained his balance after a distance and then his wings glowed and said, "Divide." Suddenly Tatsuya's body glowed. Tat felt some drain in his magic power and looked at Vala and said, "So you want to play it that way, huh?" He then formed numerous orbs of magic and fired it in Vala's direction. Seeing the numerous magical orbs coming towards him, he smirked and said, "Thanks for the feast. Divide, 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 divide." And the orbs started to get smaller and smaller till the time there was none of them left. He then looked in front but could not locate Tatsuya. Suddenly he heard, "You should never lose the sight of your enemies during new battle." He then looked up and saw Tatsuya with a huge blue orb in his hand. Tatsuya quickly approached him and smashed the orb on Vala and shouted, "Massive raise nan!" And Vala was sent down along with the orb which hit him. He tried to use his sacred gear to absorb the power and minimize the damage but was unable to. He got shocked and asked Albion, "Albion, why can't I absorb the power of this attack?" Albion was also shocked and said, "Partner, I am not familiar with the energy he used in his attack, that's why I cannot divide this." Tatsuya, who heard, then smirked and thought, "Of course you don't know, chakra is not originally an energy used in this world. Even the yokai only use senjutsu and not chakra. You must have never come across such an energy ever in your life." Unable to absorb the energy, Vala got smashed into the ground along with the raise nan, which made a huge crater in the ground, and then the raise nan exploded, making a dust cloud over the crater. Once the dust cloud started to fade away, a heavily injured Vala with most of his armor gone was visible to everyone. Tatsuya deactivated his armor and said, "I have to say it, I am impressed. You took so many hits from me and you still have enough strength left to still remain standing. Hats off to you, man." Vala looked at Tatsuya and glared at him and said, "Shut up, it's still not over, I will keep on fighting till I collapse." And again activated his armor. Tatsuya sighed and said, "As you wish, but be prepared as this one will sting you a lot, Mr. Demonic Dragon." Tatsuya then started inhaling a large amount of air in his lungs, and after his lungs were full, a white glow appeared in his mouth. Vala was watching all this, but then suddenly Albion said, "Vala, I have a bad feeling about this, give up while you still can." Vala snorted and said, Vala Lucifer never back down from a fight. And a fight like this, there is no chance that I am giving up." Hearing him, Albion sighed and then said, "Then brace yourself, partner." Tatsuya didn't pay attention to their talks and then shouted, "Holy Dragon, roar!" And a huge stream of dragon-slaying holy magic was fired at Vala. Seeing the sheer size of the roar, Vala knew that he couldn't dodge and fired a beam of his own, but that was destroyed instantly, and Vala was hit by the full force of the roar and was completely engulfed in it. Once the effect of the roar was over, Tatsuya descended from the sky and landed beside a collapsed Vala and said while looking at him, "I guess I did a little too much." And gave a tired sigh. Chapter 42, Legacy. While Tatsuya was looking at the collapsed Vala, the other members of his team approached him. They all looked at Vala and then at Tatsuya, and suddenly Baikao asked, "Just asking, is he still alive? He doesn't look like he has any life left in him." Tatsuya didn't said anything and picked up a pebble and flicked it with a bit of force. The pebble which was flicked by Tatsuya hit Vala in the ball, and an "ah" was heard by everyone. They looked at Vala, who was holding his balls and was groaning in pain. Tatsuya looked at the others and said, "Yup, he is still alive." The others looked at him and then at Vala, and then suddenly Kurika and Baikao broke out laughing. Seeing them laugh, Arthur sighed and said, "Was it really necessary to take things this far?" Tatsuya looked at Arthur calmly and said, "Then what would you have done if someone would threaten you that they will kill your sister?" Arthur didn't took much time and said, "I would kill them and slice them apart in so many pieces and make them a jigsaw puzzle." Tatsuya smiled and said, "See, you understand me." Tatsuya internally snorted and said, "If you are able to think that you would go that far for your sister, just be glad that I didn't give Vala an insta-kill." Arthur again sighed but nodded in understanding. He then looked at Vala and saw him groaning. He then went towards him and crouched down to his level and said, Now do you understand why you should not provoke someone suddenly? Vala's body was in pain, but he still managed to turn around and look at Arthur and said with a satisfied smile, "It felt really good." Tatsuya, who heard him, turned towards Vala's team and asked, "Is he a masochist?" Hearing him, Kurika and Baikao, who had somehow controlled themselves again, started laughing loudly, and Arthur too was trying very hard to hold back from laughing while covering Le Fei's ears. He then turned towards Tatsuya and said, "Tatsuya-san, you should not say such things in presence of someone innocent." While still controlling his laugh, Baikao then looked at Vala and said, "You really looked fucked up right now. I should take a picture of you." While Baikao took out his phone and was taking Vala's picture, Arthur glared at him and said, "Hey, didn't I say not to say obscene words in presence of someone innocent?" while still covering Le Fei's ears. Arthur then turned serious and said, "Seriously thought, how are you planning to go back in such conditions?" Baikao put his phone back and said, "Yeah, he would like to know how you the hell did you fucked up so much. Hey, no obscene words." Tatsuya turned towards Baikao and asked, "He?" Baikao looked at Tatsuya and then said, "Oh right, you don't know, we are talking about his foster parent Azazel." When he said that, both Vala and Arthur glared at him and Baikao shivered and asked, "What?" Suddenly realization hit him and his eyes widened. He scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and said, "Sorry, I should have not disclosed that information so easily." Seeing the tense atmosphere, Tatsuya sighed and said, "You don't have to worry about anything. If he does not bother me too much, I won't do anything." He then looked at Vala and said with a glare, "And that's for you too, or the next time I will fuck you up to a whole another level." Arthur glared at Tatsuya and shouted, "Hey!" Vala looked at Tatsuya and said in a displeased tone, "Then next time accept my challenge without taking things so far, it just felt too good." Tatsuya again looked at him weirdly and then looked at his teammates and said, "Are you sure he is not a masochist?" I said, "Stop it." Tatsuya then moved towards Vala and said, "I will think about it. For the time being I will heal you so that you are at the very least able to walk." And started healing him. After healing him a bit, Tatsuya stood up and then looked at Arthur and Baikao and said, "Help him get up." Both of them nodded and helped Vala. Vala was then standing while holding in Bijou's and Arthur's shoulder. Tatsuya then gave him an envelope and said, "Give this to Azazel, it will help in explaining things to him. I presume that you are hiding the fact that you are a part of a terrorist group from him." Vala only nodded and took the letter. He then made a magic circle below his feet and Arthur and Baikao left him. Vala then looked at Tatsuya and thought, he did all that for his family. Hey, I guess having and protecting a family indeed makes you stronger. Tatsuya, who heard him through his telepathy, smiled lightly and said, "You have one as well, don't you?" and then pointed to his team. Vala was slightly shocked by it but then smiled and said, "Next time it will be you who will be in the crater." Tatsuya snorted and said, "Hey, you are 100 years too early to claim that." And smiled. Vala smiled as well and said, "Till next time." Tatsuya waved his hand and say, "Yeah," and Vala disappeared. Tatsuya then turned to the others and said, "I guess it finally is the time for us to go back." They all nodded, but suddenly Baikao asked, "Hey, what was in that envelope?" Hearing him, Tatsuya gave an evil smile and said, "Ask him yourself." Though Baikao was very eager to know, and seeing Tatsuya's smile he was sure that it was something funny, but decided to ask Vala directly later. As he was about to leave, Kurika jumped on him but Tatsuya avoided her and said, while moving his index finger to and fro. Seeing that, Kurika pouted and looked away. Tatsuya sighed and approached her, gave her a peck on her cheek and said, "Later," and teleported away. Kurika was left as a blushing mess, as she didn't thought that Tatsuya would take the initiative himself. Seeing her like that, Baikao smirked and said in a teasing tone, "Ho, the always flirting Kurika," blushing by a kiss on the cheek. "Now that's new." He said that while he rubbed his chin. Hearing him, Kurika got pissed and said, "Fuck off, Baikao." Arthur suddenly had tick mark all over his face and shouted, "Shut up. Don't you understand? Don't speak obscene words in front of children." Meanwhile, at the Grigori headquarters, Vala just returned back, and as Azazel saw him he was way too surprised. He looked at the pitiful state of Vala and asked, "Why the hell are you looking like some shit?" Vala didn't said anything and just handed him the envelope that Tatsuya gave him. Azazel was a bit confused by this but still took the envelope and opened it. When the envelope was open, he found a letter and a discount coupon of Tatsuya's restaurant. He first looked at the coupon and then read the letter. After reading the letter he put it down and looked at Vala seriously. Volley also got tensed and thought, what the hell is in that letter? Azazel gave a fake cough and said, so you have grown up, hey? It feels like that it was just yesterday when I picked the brat you once were and now here we are. Time does flow very quickly. He paused for a while and was remembering the past. Volley was still tensed and was wondering what would he say. Azazel came out of thinking and said, anyways it seems like I will now be passing my legacy on to you. He then summoned a book through his magic and gave it to Volley. Volley took the book hesitatingly and then read the title, The Art of True Perversion by Azazel. Volley looked at the book with a confused look and was about to ask whether Azazel had given something wrong to him, but the Azazel spoke. That book contains all the methods for all types of perverts. From beginners to pros, it's a well-compiled book and its ways are certified by millions of people all around the world. It will surely help you. And as my own son, it is not acceptable in the least that you get caught while peeping on the ladies while they are bathing. Azazel remained serious throughout his whole speech. Volley was looking at him with a dumbfounded expression and then said, Azazel then stood up and made a fist and said, from now on I will be giving you lectures on perversion personally. You should feel lucky, not everyone is able to take them for free. He said while rubbing his beard. Volley then came out of shock and asked, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Azazel smiled at him and said, there is no reason to be shy, you are just a healthy growing boy. It only means that I was correct in your upbringing. Volley was still confused and said, what are you talking about? I don't understand a bit. Azazel looked at him and said, weren't you caught while peeping on women bathing in a hot spring and was beaten to hell by your friend because her family was in there as well? Seriously though, I am a bit surprised that he was able to beat you to pulp. But he is a good friend you got. He even gave a discount coupon of the recently famous restaurant in Kuaha. He showed the coupon to Volley and then said, I am glad that you have got some great friends. Volley, who now understood what happened, immediately took the letter and read it. After reading the letter he was fuming with rage and thought, that bastard, I will kick his ass the next time we meet. Albion too was laughing very hard and was saying, you got played by that brat. Ha 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 ha, seriously, how the hell could he think of something like this? It is hilarious, ha 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 ha. Volley was getting more pissed by his laughing and shouted in his mind, shut up Albion. Azazel placed his hand on Volley's shoulder and said, make sure to master the art of perversion, it is our legacy after all. Hearing him, Volley finally snapped and shouted, Tatsuya, I will kill you. Chapter 43, I love you all. After all the things were over, Tatsuya teleported back to his house. He opened the door and entered the house. He checked the house with his presence detection and found everyone. All the girls were sleeping in his room. Tatsuya sighed and decided to take a bath. After taking a bath he went to the kitchen. He made himself some overnight snack and after eating it he went and slept on the couch. The next morning he woke up, he found Kurumi sleeping with him. He shrugged it off and held her tightly and went back to sleep. Kurumi, who was awakened by his action, blushed and held him more tightly and snuggled up to him and slept as well. After sleeping a few more hours, Tatsuya suddenly woke up because he felt some killing intent. He got ready and looked at source of the killing intent and found Miyuki glaring at him. Tatsuya sighed and asked, what happened? Miyuki didn't said anything and kept glaring at him. Tatsuya, who was a bit confused, looked around him and found Kurumi sleeping with him. Now understanding what happened, he sighed and said, it's not my fault, she was the one who came on the couch I was sleeping on. Miyuki was dissatisfied by his answer and said, but you could have just kicked her off the couch. Tatsuya looked weirdly at Miyuki and asked, and why would I do that? Hearing his question, Miyuki fell silent, not knowing how to answer. Seeing that she was not answering, Tatsuya said, you can't answer me, can you? Tatsuya sighed and said, just think about it, how would you feel if I were to shove you away every time you try to act clingy to me? Miyuki tried imagining what Tatsuya just said and then broke out crying. Seeing her cry, Tatsuya looked at her and said, feels bad, right? I too would feel the same if any of you were to do that to me. And hugged Miyuki and started consoling her. While he kept consoling Miyuki, both Kurumi and Himari had woken up and were sitting near them. Himari wanted to ask what was happening, but seeing Miyuki crying she stopped and waited for her to calm down. Once Miyuki stopped crying, Tatsuya looked at her and said, I know that you do like me and being possessive for the one you like is understandable and I don't mind you being possessive, just tone it down a little because it do hurts me seeing you get hurt, but you understand that just like you those two like me as well. Just think how do they feel seeing the person they like with other girls. Tatsuya then lowered his head and said, I do know that I am a scumbag and apologize to you all, but I cannot choose any one of you over the other, and if you dislike me for being indecisive, then you just..." As he was about to continue, all the three girls put their hands on his mouth and said, "Now, why are you being so overdramatic? It doesn't suit you at all." Tatsuya sighed and said, "Yeah, you are right, those cliché lines were making me want to puke. Anyways, you understand what I meant to say, right? It's up to you guys to decide." Kurumi grinned and said, "What are you taking about? You are my Jinchuriki, and also I cannot survive in this world without being connected to you, so we are stuck together for our whole life." Himari then placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "I too am not leaving, as you did promise me to take responsibility for me, though you meant as a pet, but still you are going to take care of me, and I have already raised my status from your cat to your lover, right?" She smiled and looked at Tatsuya and said, "And besides, if I leave you alone, who is going to cook food for you when you are tired? I cannot depend on these fools who only know two things in kitchen: boiling the water and freezing ice cubes." Both Miyuki and Kurumi glared at Himari, who looked back at them with a smug look on her face. Seeing her smug, both of them wanted to rebuke, but they knew that what Himari was saying was true. Miyuki then looked at Tatsuya and said, "And I cannot leave you as well, because if I leave you alone, who is going to protect you from all the horny bitches who are eyeing you on the street? And I will also try to tone my possessiveness down a bit, but only a bit." When she said that, both Himari and Kurumi looked at her weirdly and said, "Who are you, imposter? Where is the cold-hearted Yandere girl we know? You are not Miyuki, where is she?" Hearing them, Miyuki's lips twitched and she said, "If not for Uni-sama hugging me right now, you two would have been done for." Seeing their interaction, Tatsuya laughed and said, "Looks like you all are stuck with me, hey? Well, I will try my best so that you are not going to get rid of me soon." And smiled at them. Seeing his smile, they were mesmerized and thought at the same time, "I have a feeling that there will be many more joining us later. Well, whatever, it cannot be helped, after all he is the best." Tatsuya, who saw them motionless, sighed and enclosed them in a bear hug and said, "I love you all." Hearing him, they all snuggled closer to him and said, "We already know." Chapter 44, I Am a God. After talking with each other for a bit longer, they all decided to have breakfast, and Tatsuya decided to check on Ingvild and Koisha. Tatsuya knocked on the door and waited for a response. After a while, Tatsuya heard a come in and entered the room. Tatsuya looked at both his guests and asked Koisha, "How are you feeling?" Hearing his question, Koisha started to check her body, and after confirming everything, she looked at Tatsuya and said, "It's better than before." She then gave a sigh and said, "I still cannot believe how can I heal so fast." Tatsuya, who saw her reaction, chuckled. Seeing him chuckle, Koisha looked at him and asked, "What's so funny here?" Tatsuya stopped chuckling and said, "Nothing. Anyways, it's good that you are feeling well and you are healing faster because I enhanced your recovery using my magic." He then looked at Ingvild and asked, "Is there any change in her since then?" Koisha too looked at Ingvild and said with a sad tone, "Unfortunately, no. There is still no change in her condition." Suddenly Tatsuya placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "Don't worry, you did what you could, now it's my job to heal her." Hearing him, Koisha smiled and said, "Well then, make sure that you don't waste my hard work and heal her soon." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Getting ahead of yourself, and flicked her forehead. Koisha's face twitched in pain, and then she glared at Tatsuya and said, "What the hell was that for?" Tatsuya didn't said anything and smiled and then again flicked her forehead. Koisha looked at Tatsuya with rage and said, "Hey, before she could say anything, Tatsuya flicked her forehead again. This kept on happening for a while, and finally, unable to bear, Koisha looked at Tatsuya with tears in her eyes and said, Stop, I apologize for getting ahead of myself." Tatsuya again moved his hands towards her, and seeing that Koisha shut her eyes close. But instead of feeling pain, she felt comfortable and looked up. Tatsuya, who was easing her pain with his magic, looked at her and said, "Sorry about that." Koisha wanted to snap at him but refrained from doing that. She glared at Tatsuya and thought, "Once I am healed and these restraints are removed, I will pay you back for all the mean things that you did to me," and started laughing inside her mind. Tatsuya heard her thoughts through telepathy and sighed. He healed her forehead and then removed his hand. Koisha looked at him with a slight disappointment but didn't say anything. Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Well, I will be going for now and will return to treat her later. Make sure to rest well and wait for me." And ruffled her hair. Koisha snorted and said, "Stop ruining my hair and just go." She then looked away and smiled. Tatsuya left the room and went to have breakfast with others. He asked Himura to even prepare something for the guests and then left for work. After working for several hours in his restaurant, Tatsuya left and decided to go back home. After entering the house, Tatsuya took a bath and got refreshed. He then went towards the room Koisha and Ingvild was in. He knocked on the door and after waiting for a while, entered. He looked at Koisha, raised his hand and said, "Yo," and went towards her. He then took something out of his storage and placed in front of Koisha. Koisha looked at the thing in front of her and saw a paper cup filled with some sort of drink in it. She then looked at Tatsuya with a confused look and asked, "What is this?" Tatsuya looked at her blankly and said, "Milkshake." And then went toward Ingvild and started transferring his magic while drinking one himself. Koisha too didn't thought much and decided to sip on hers silently. They kept on talking to each other while Tatsuya was in the room so as to kill some time. After hours of waiting, Ingvild's finger twitched a little. Seeing the change in her condition, Tatsuya stopped talking and started to pump more energy into her to the point she started glowing. Seeing the change, Koisha too looked at both of them intently. Her hopes of treating Sareorg's mother were increasing as she was seeing Tatsuya cure Ingvild. And after a long wait, Ingvild finally opened her eyes. After getting her senses back to normal, she started looking around and saw a handsome boy standing near her and a beautiful girl lying on one bed. She looked at both of them and asked in a confused voice, "Where am I?" Koisha was about to answer, but Tatsuya suddenly stopped her and said, "You are in a place where mortals like you appear before going for an afterlife." Ingvild and Koisha, who heard him, had different reactions. Koisha was wondering what Tatsuya was doing but didn't interrupted him and let him do as he pleased. Ingvild, who heard Tatsuya, was even more confused and asked, "What afterlife? Am I dead or what?" Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Yes, my child, you are dead indeed and is about to go to the next plane from here on, depending on your deeds, and by checking your records I can even let you live in a different world with a wish, no less, or you can go to heaven and live your life peacefully there." Ingvild then looked at him intently and asked, "Are you some kind of god?" "That's true, my child, I am the god who is in charge of soul management and decides where souls of the dead go." He then dramatically opened his arms and his body started glowing. He looked at Ingvild and asked, "So ask, my child, what do you desire? You have one wish, so think carefully." Chapter 45, You Lied to Me. Ingvild, who heard him, remained silent and was digesting the information she got. After she was done, she looked back at Tatsuya and asked, "Can I go back in my own world?" Tatsuya shook his head and said, "No, that's not possible, as in your world you are already dead." Hearing him, Ingvild got depressed and looked down. Seeing her, Tatsuya too got a bit sad and said, "I cannot send you to your world in your time, but I can still send you a few years after you died." Ingvild raised her head and looked at Tatsuya with some hope. She asked, "How many years further?" Tatsuya looked back at her and said, 100 years. Ingvild's face became neutral and she looked intently at Tatsuya and asked, "How can you say 100 years as a few?" Tatsuya, who heard her, looked back at her with a neutral expression as well and said, "It's the best offer I can give, take it or leave it." Ingvild then again started thinking and after a while sighed and said, "Okay, I want to go back to my own world." Tatsuya then asked her with an intrigued voice, "It shall be done, but may I ask why do you want to go back to your own world when there is nothing that you will recognize, as the civilization has advanced a lot since then? You even had the option to go to another world and start from the beginning." Ingvild then showed a helpless smile and said, "I want to go back to my old world because I have not yet seen anything there. The only thing that I have seen is my own town, the sea, and I only had some friends. That's why I want to go back to my old world and explore it and make more friends." Tatsuya still looked confused and asked, "But can't you do the same in the new world? You can explore it and even make new friends there, so why do you want to go back?" Ingvild then said, "I want to explore my world first and want to experience it whole. Even if the idea of a new world is intriguing, I somehow still feel attached to my own world." Tatsuya looked at her and thought, cliché. But then Ingvild made a serious expression and said, "Plus there is also a possibility that the new world is not safe. What if it is a world that treats women unfairly? There is also a possibility of being sent to dangerous location. I can even be sent there, creature. There are lots and lots of unsuitable possibilities in that new world and I even know nothing about it." Listening to her, Tatsuya too got impressed by her intellect and asked, "Then how can you believe there are no such things in your previous world? After all, the society surely would have undergone a change in 100 years. Ingvild heard his question and answered with a smile, "I don't know that, I am just taking a gamble here." And there is also a fact that I at least know something about my own world, like language and sorts. I know that I am taking a big gamble, but that's all what I can think of. Tatsuya then rubbed his chin and asked, then what about going to the heaven? You also have that option. Ingvild shook her head and said, that's a big no, because what I said in the beginning is also true. I still want to explore the world and make new friends. Tatsuya looked at her with a neutral expression and asked, are you sure? There are many who would want what you are simply refusing. Ingvild smiled and said, I will think of going there the next time I will die. After all, even if I die again, I will come back here, right? Tatsuya smiled and said, that's true. Then what is the wish that you want? Ingvild smiled brightly and said, the wish I want is high immunity to diseases of all kinds. Tatsuya then looked at her with a confused expression and asked, why do you want that? You can easily ask for power, money, looks, etc., and all you want is immunity. Why? Ingvild then again smiled helplessly and said, you see, I was not able to explore the world and make a lot of friends because my body was always prone to diseases and most of the time I was on my bed, so this time I want to avoid all that. Tatsuya gave an understanding nod and then raised his hand and pointed it in Ingvild. Ingvild looked at his hand and then suddenly her body started glowing. She started checking her body and thought, this feels so good, and even the pain in my body is easing. Ah, what a bliss. Her body then stopped glowing and she looked at Tatsuya. Tatsuya looked back at her as well and said, I have fulfilled your wish and you are now back in your world. Now step out of the room and walk straight in the hallway. Once you reach a room with a big table at the center, you will find 3 girls there. Ask them to help you check your body's physical condition. Tell them that Tatsuya said so. He then motioned at the door and said, now go. Ingvild only nodded and then stepped out of the room. Once the door was closed and Tatsuya made sure that Ingvild was gone, Tatsuya sighed and said, talking like that felt way too weird. I am not doing that again. Koisha, who was silent during the whole ordeals, finally opened her mouth and asked, what the hell was that? Tatsuya looked at her and said with a neutral tone, consequences of making me sit here without doing anything. Koisha looked at him with a deadpan expression and asked, was that fine for us to do that? Tatsuya waved his hand and said, relax, it's not a big deal, besides she did wake up after 100 years. I was more worried about what to do if she asked to transport her to another world. Koisha thought for a bit and then shrugged her shoulders and said, whatever, it was not me who said anything. You would be the only one who will bear the consequences anyway. Hearing her, Tatsuya's lips twitched a bit. She then looked at him and asked, and what was that glow on her? Tatsuya then again looked at her and said, oh, that. I just eased the soreness in her body joints and healed the after effects of the treatment, that's all. Just as he finished saying that, the door of the room was suddenly opened and then a purple blur was seen. The next moment Ingvild was holding Tatsuya's collar and was shaking him while saying, you lied to me. Chapter 46, We Are Your Parents. After Ingvild calmed down a bit and stopped shaking Tatsuya, she started to get embarrassed and covered her face with her hands. Tatsuya adjusted his clothes, then looked towards Ingvild and then said, sorry, with a slight bow, and then stood there in silence. Feeling awkward by the silence, Ingvild looked at Tatsuya from between her fingers, and when she saw him not in the slightest bit flustered and his neutral expression, she became even more nervous. Seeing that how nervous she was feeling, Tatsuya sighed and said, sit down first, let us explain what happened for you to be present here, or more clearly, what we actually know about. Ingvild sheepishly nodded her head and sat down on the bed she was lying on, and Tatsuya sat beside Koisha. Tatsuya then looked at Ingvild and said, my name is Tatsuya, a human, and this lazy person who remain lying all the time is Koisha, a devil. We are your actual parents. Both the girls became motionless after hearing what he said. Ingvild started muttering, my actual mom and dad. My parents look as old as me, does that mean that I will never grow up just like them? Soon Koisha came out of shock and shouted, who are you calling lazy, you bastard? I am still recovering, and besides, how the hell she became my daughter? Suddenly the door of the room was opened with a loud this, and the room suddenly became cold. Tatsuya looked in the direction and saw Miyuki, whose eyes were covered with hair. There were also Himari and Kurumi behind her, sighing. Miyuki looked up and said in a cold voice, which of you bitch has a daughter with Oni-sama? Tell me now. Seeing her, both Koisha and Ingvild got scared, and Ingvild immediately pointed at Koisha. Koisha too wanted to point at Ingvild but could not, as her hands were broken. Koisha gulped her saliva and then looked at Miyuki with fear and said, wait Miyuki, this is a misunderstanding, I have no relationship with Tatsuya. He is just pulling a prank. But all her pleas were in vain and Miyuki started walking towards her and said, "You harlot, you dare taint Oni-sama with your worthlessness. My Oni-sama. You need to die." Miyuki then formed an ice spike and continued walking. She again looked at the scared Koisha and said, "Don't worry though, I will give you a painless death and I promise to not kill your child because she also belonged to Oni-sama." Miyuki was about to stab Koisha but Tatsuya stopped her hand and then gave her a light head chop. Miyuki then looked at Tatsuya with her normal expression and asked, "What happened Oni-sama, why do you hit me?" Seeing her sudden change, both Koisha and Ingvild were speechless. Both Himari and Kurumi were trying their very best not to laugh on seeing their reactions. Tatsuya then held Miyuki's face and moved it so that she faced Ingvild and asked, "What age do you think she is?" Miyuki looked at Ingvild intently and then turned towards Tatsuya with a smile and said, "She is probably around my age." Tatsuya nodded and smiled and said, "Then how the hell do you think that I can make a child when I was just a year old?" Hearing his question, Miyuki blanked for a while and then asked, "Then about the child?" Tatsuya sighed and said, "It was just a prank." "Geez, you jump to conclusions too quickly, you should analyze the situation first before taking any actions, understand?" And started petting her head. Receiving the head pat, Miyuki was in bliss. After petting her for a while, Tatsuya stopped making her feel a bit disappointed, but she became normal and turned towards Koisha and said, "I am sorry for threatening you just now, I hope that you don't take it too seriously." Hearing her apology, Koisha rapidly started shaking her head and said, "No, you don't have to apologize, it was just a misunderstanding. The one who is actually at fault here is Tatsuya. If he didn't try to make such a prank, there would be no such problem." Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Are you really sure that you should speak badly of me? If not for me, not even Himari and Kurumi could have saved you. Maybe next time I should not stop her." Just as he finished speaking, he saw Koisha bowing her head as much as she could. Koisha, who suddenly thought about what would have happened if Tatsuya would have not stopped Miyuki again, became frightened and bowed her head and said, "I am very grateful for received your kindness, Tatsuya-sama, I will always remember it and will help you whenever you would be in need of me." Tatsuya nodded his head in satisfaction and said, "Good, there is no problem as long as you understand. You may raise your head now." Koisha then raised her head and gave a sigh of relief. Suddenly she felt a hand on her shoulder and she turned her head and saw Himari. Himari looked at her and said, "You will be used to all this in time." Koisha wasn't sure what to say and simply nodded her head. Chapter 47, Welcome to the team. After everyone was calmed down, Tatsuya turned towards Ingvild and said, "Sorry for all that." Ingvild didn't said anything and continued to stare at him. She then sighed and said, "I am Ingvild Leviathan, a human-devil hybrid, I hope that you will not pull any more pranks." Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Of course, I hope that we get along from now on." Ingvild nodded her head and said, "I hope so as well. Now are you going to tell me why am I here?" Tatsuya nodded her head and then looked at Koisha and said, "Your turn now." Koisha nodded her head and then started explaining Ingvild about the situation. After Koisha stopped talking, Ingvild started thinking. Tatsuya, who saw this, looked at her and said, "Take your time, we are not in a hurry." Ingvild nodded her head and continued. After a while she looked back at others and said, "Looks like I really slept for 100 years. She then turned towards Tatsuya and bowed her head a bit and said, "Thank you for curing me, I am very grateful to you. If there is anything that you want my help with, then don't hesitate to ask." Tatsuya waved his hand and said, "No problem there, and even if I would not have helped, you would have woken up in a few years or so. I just lessened the time in which you would have woken up." Ingvild then looked at him and said, "Even so, I am very grateful for that." And smiled. Tatsuya only nodded his head and then stood silent. Koisha then looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Tatsuya, you just said that you only decreased the time she needed to recover. What do you mean by that?" Hearing her question, Tatsuya turned serious and said, "What I mean is that I was not the one who was curing her, she was already being cured by her sacred gear, who was absorbing her energy to take its form, I only supplied it with more energy to fasten its pace." Tatsuya then turned towards Ingvild and asked, "Now what will you do? Where will you stay from now on?" Ingvild thought for a while and then said, "I don't know, but I will work something out. You don't have to be worried about me." Tatsuya looked at her sternly and said, "Who said I was worrying about you? Looks like you don't understand my question." He then sighed and looked back at her and said, "Let me reframe it. What I mean to ask is, how are you going to survive in the world right now? Hearing his question, all of them became confused, and seeing all of them, Tatsuya gave an annoyed sigh and said, "You guys seriously don't understand a thing. I am saying that you are not just any devil, you are a descendant of the former devil king Leviathan. Once the factions come to know of your existence, your life will become a literal hell. The new devils will probably try to either kill you or would torture to interrogate you, and the old devil faction will surely try to recruit you and use you in the power struggle. Not to mention the angels and fallen angels will also come after your head. And don't tell me that you can lay low in this world forever. So I ask you again, what will you do now?" Hearing all the things that could happen to her, Ingvild became uncertain of her earlier decision and started thinking what to do. Koisha wanted to ask her to join Saray Org's peerage, but the fact that Tatsuya told about what the devils would do to her once they come to know of her existence made her stop. She then began thinking about a solution for her problem but couldn't think of anything. Same thing was going on with the other girls present in the room. Tatsuya finally stepped forward and said, "If you don't have anywhere to go, then why don't you join my team?" All of them then looked at Tatsuya speechlessly. Noticing all the gazes at him, Tatsuya looked back at them and asked, "What?" Koisha was the first to speak, and she said, "I didn't know that you were a good person." Tatsuya's brows twitched a bit and he said, "Aren't you freeloading on this good person's home?" Hearing him, Koisha became red from embarrassment and looked away. Ingvild then looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Why do you want me to be in your team?" Tatsuya then looked back at Ingvild and shrugged his shoulders and said, "I am not being good to you, you can call it something like an investment. Having a descendant of a devil king with a sacred gear, no less. Is there anything that I can argue to not ask you to join my team?" Tatsuya then raised his hand and said, "In return you will get," and started counting on his fingers, 1 shelter, 2 nutrition, 3 training for fighting and self-defense, 4 and of course the protection from all other factions. I don't want to brag, but I can assure you that the only people who know that we belong to the supernatural world are only the people whom we told about it ourselves. So what is your answer? And also you will also help in house chores and sometimes work in the restaurant if there is too much rush." Ingvild then began thinking, and after thinking for a while she looked at Tatsuya and said, "I would like to join, but I don't want to trouble you and put you all in danger." Hearing her, Tatsuya sighed and said, "Look, if you are not joining only because you don't want to put us in danger, then that's no worry for us. All of us are pretty strong and I can annihilate any enemy we face." Ingvild then asked, "If you can annihilate anyone, then why are you making a team?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Well, I am forming a team because even though I can annihilate anyone, there are still times when I may not be able to reach on time, and at those times having a group would be better for my team, as most of the time Kurumi would be with me, making these two left alone to face the enemy. So I am forming a group only to reassure myself that nothing happens to the others in my team." Ingvild then squinted her eyes a bit and asked, "Then do you mean that if I was not capable enough you would not have asked me to join your team?" Tatsuya nodded her head and said, "Yes, I would not have asked you to join my team then. Protecting such a comrade is no problem for me, but not being able to protect such a comrade when I am not nearby will make me more depressed. And it would not be only me, others in the team would also feel sad if such a thing were to happen." Tatsuya then looked away and said, "I don't want that, I don't want to see a comrade die when I am still alive." He didn't turn back and said, "I will ask you one last time, will you join my team?" Ingvild looked at him for a while and then hugged him and said, "Okay, I will join. I don't want to see my savior sad, and besides you did promise me that you will protect me as well, right?" and smiled. Tatsuya also smiled and said, "Of course. Welcome to the team, Ingvild, I hope that we get along well." Chapter 48, Going to the Underworld. After joining the team, Ingvild has also started living in the Shiba residence. Most of her time is usually spent on learning about the changes that the society has undergone in the past century. Tatsuya has also started training her, which sometimes made her question herself whether her decision of joining his team was correct or not, but she stopped complaining once she Tatsuya's cooking and now trains diligently. Tatsuya also checks the condition of her body from time to time so as to confirm if her body is properly healed or not. She has also learned the most important rule of the Shiba household: no one touched the coffee jelly. Ingvild has also come to admire Tatsuya because of him being an all-rounder. Seeing his battle against both Himari and Miyuki made her speechless. Like this, a week passed and now Koisha has been fully healed. Tatsuya went to her room and entered without knocking. As he entered the room, he saw a naked Koisha changing her clothes. They made eye contact with each other and stared for a while. Tatsuya then turned around and said, "Sorry, force of habit." and left the room. Koisha was left blushing inside the room and she quickly changed her clothes and then quickly went out of the room. As soon as she opened the door and stepped forward she crashed into Tatsuya making her fall backwards, but before she fell Tatsuya caught her and then made her stand still. She glared at him and said, "Don't you have the decency of knocking before entering the room?" Tatsuya rubbed the back of his head and said sheepishly, "Sorry about that, but hey, look on the bright side, it showed me how much your health has improved over the past week. Before you came here you were not even able to move your hands and legs, and now you are able to change your clothes and is also able to run after me. So when you take all that into consideration, what all happened was only a small price to pay." Hearing him, Koisha got a bit angry and said, "You just saw a woman's naked body, do you think that is a petty thing?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "I didn't said that it was a petty thing, in fact I felt that the view was great. I can already say that you would turn out to be a beautiful woman once you grow up." When she heard what Tatsuya said she blushed and said, "That's not the problem here." Tatsuya then sighed and said, "Then if it makes you feel any better then you can see me naked as well," and started to take out his shirt, but before he could take it off Koisha caught his hands and said while blushing, "Stop, stop, stop, there is no need for that, I forgive you," and sighed. She then took a glance at his body and blushed more. Tatsuya then adjusted his clothes and then looked at Koisha, who was looking down in shame. Sighing, Tatsuya put a hand on her head and started petting her and said, "I am sorry." She didn't said anything and only nodded her head. Tatsuya petted her head for a while and once he thought that Koisha was back to normal he stopped. He then looked at her seriously and said, "I have checked Ingvild's body during the course of week and there have been no problems yet seen with her condition. But I cannot say the same for the other patient because the reason for her improvement is mostly because of her sacred gear." Koisha also turned serious and then said, "I understand, I will not blame you for anything, even if you improve her condition a bit we would be really grateful to you." Tatsuya nodded in response. She then looked confused and asked, "By the way, what sacred gear does Ingvild possess?" Tatsuya looked at her with a deadpan expression and said, "Do you really think that I will tell you the information about my teammates?" When she heard that she pouted and looked away. Tatsuya poked her cheeks and said, "Let's go and have breakfast." Even though Koisha was a bit angry she still nodded her head and thought, "He makes me flustered so easily, what the hell is with this guy? Ugh, I will surely pay him back in future." Tatsuya smiled and thought, "Good luck with that," and then went to have breakfast with others. Once the breakfast was done Tatsuya looked at the others and said, "Miyuki, Himari, Ingvild and Kurumi, I will be going to the underworld today along with the Koisha to treat the other patients, so I allow you all to take a day off from training as well." He then passed an envelope to them and said, "There is some money here, you can use it as you all like." Miyuki then looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Ani-sama, can I tag along as well?" To which Tatsuya shook his head in denial and said, "No, you can't, we are still not sure what are their intentions yet, and even if I trust Koisha a bit, but we still don't know what would they plan against us. So I cannot put all of your lives in danger." Ingvild then looked worried and asked, "Will you be okay? Your life would not be in danger, right?" Tatsuya then smiled at her, making her mesmerized, and said, "There is nothing to worry about, I will not be harmed, and even if the situation takes turn for worse I can simply teleport back, or I can even destroy that faction." Tatsuya then looked at them with seriousness and said, "Listen carefully, if there is anything wrong here contact me immediately, you all are my first priority after all." He then looked at Kurumi and said, "I am leaving you here, so you are the in charge, make sure to protect them." Kurumi nodded and said, "You don't have to be worried, they all are self-capable, and if the situation arises I will fight as well." Tatsuya nodded and then looked at Koisha and said, "Then let's go to the underworld now." Koisha then looked at him and said, "There is just a slight problem, you cannot travel with my magic circle because you are not a part of my master's peerage." Tatsuya looked back at her and then said, "You don't have to be worried about that, I can travel on my own, you just need to lock your location and I will teleport there as well." Koisha nodded and made her magic circle, and after confirming the location Tatsuya made his as well. He looked at his team for one last time and then said, "I will be going now, make sure to enjoy your day off and don't even think about touching my coffee jelly." His team nodded and said, "Make sure to come back soon." Tatsuya nodded and smiled at them, making all of them blush. He then looked at Koisha and nodded his head. Koisha, who saw him, nodded her head in response as well. Tatsuya then looked at his circle and said, "Underworld, here I come." And then both of them disappeared. Chapter 49, Hold Back. Tatsuya and Koisha appeared in some sort of garden with their respective magic circles underneath them. Tatsuya then started checking his surroundings and saw a purple sky, a garden where they appeared in a small mansion near it. Koisha then looked at Tatsuya and said, "Welcome to the underworld, we are currently in my master's territory, or you can also call it our home. Me and all of my master's peerage members live here." Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Though I don't think that I have to remind you, but make sure if anyone from your side takes action against me, I will not stay still as well." Koisha also nodded her head and then sheepishly asked, "Can you at least not go too hard on them, if they attack because of some misunderstanding?" Tatsuya then sighed and nodded. He then thought, "I have a feeling that they will definitely attack me now." Koisha then started walking and then said, "Follow me." Tatsuya didn't said anything and silently followed her. Once they reached the front of the mansion, Koisha turned towards Tatsuya and said, "Wait here." Koisha then walked towards the door and then pushed the doorbell. After a while a voice was heard, "Who is there?" Koisha didn't took much time and said, "It's me." As soon as she said that, various noises were heard by the both of them. Tatsuya looked at Koisha, who looked back at him with a wry smile. Then suddenly the door opened and various people came out of the mansion. A blonde girl then stepped forward and grabbed Koisha's shoulders and then started shaking her and asked, "Where were you all this time? Do you know how worried I was?" Then an orange-haired young man stepped forward and said, "Stop that, Koreana. How will she answer if you keep on shaking her like that?" He then turned towards Koisha and said, "I am glad that you came back safely." While this was going on, Tatsuya was silently looking at them with a smile and thought, "She has a good family." Then suddenly two men, one with green hair and one with blonde hair, noticed Tatsuya and asked, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" This brought everyone's attention at him and they all started looking at him curiously. Tatsuya simply looked at Koisha and said, "Explain the situation to your friends." Koisha was about to speak, but then a giant man who was practically made of rocks walked towards Tatsuya and said, "Didn't you hear? We asked you what are you doing here, answer now." Koisha then grasped everyone's attention and said, "Stop it you guys, he was the one who helped me earlier. If not for him I would not be able to return home." But then a silver armor-cladded person said, "So you mean to say that a human helped you overcome a situation which you, a devil, could not? I don't believe it. That human must have used some sort of magic on her." Hearing him, all the other males except for the orange-haired one gathered around Tatsuya. The girl named Koreana sighed and said, "Guys, I don't believe that she is under some sort of spell. Why don't you ask her first? It could also be a misunderstanding." But the same armor guy spoke again, "We will surely interrogate him, but after we restrain him first. We don't know what his intentions are yet." Then the green-haired guy pointed his staff at him and said, "Answer, human, did you use any sort of magic on her?" But the stone guy stopped him and said, "Leave that for later." He then looked at Tatsuya and said, "Surrender now, and we will make sure that you are not harmed much." When Tatsuya heard him, he gave a tired sigh, and seeing him sigh, Koisha face-palmed and said, "So much for my promise of not making trouble for him. Those guys are now in serious trouble." Hearing her, Koreana looked at her with widened eyes and asked, "Is that handsome guy really that strong?" Koisha continued to look at Tatsuya and said, "See for yourself, it will be over soon." This made both Koreana and the orange-haired guy curious, and they too looked at Tatsuya. Tatsuya then took his hand out of his pocket and then stretched them and said, "You know what? You just fucked up." Tatsuya then used his telekinesis and all of them started floating in air, making them surprised. Tatsuya didn't let them say anything and then started revolving them around him at a very high speed, and then finally made them crash against each other and let them fall unconsciously on the ground. Seeing what Tatsuya just did, the remaining three were looking at him with amazement. Even Koisha was shocked seeing what Tatsuya just did. Tatsuya then looked at the orange-haired guy and asked, "You are not going to join Mr. Lion?" This made him shocked, but he overcame it quickly and said, "I have no such intentions. On the other hand, I would like to apologize to you on their behalf, they are still a bit immature." Tatsuya shook his head and said, "As long as they understand." Koisha then came out of shock and looked at Tatsuya for a while. Feeling her gaze, Tatsuya looked at her and asked, "What?" Koisha then pointed at the pile of bodies, her teammates, and said, "Didn't you say that you would go easy?" Tatsuya looked at her with a weird look and said, "Didn't I held back enough? What do you want me to do, kick on their balls?" Hearing his answer, Koisha sighed and said, "Whatever, it was their fault to begin with, but please hold back a bit more the next time they fight you." Tatsuya gave an annoyed sigh and thought, I will crush their balls the next time they decide to attack me without any reason. Chapter 50, Meeting Sarayorg. After helping the unconscious comrades Koisha, Koriana, and the orange-haired guy made way towards Tatsuya. The orange-haired guy bowed a little and said, I am Regulus, the pawn of my master Sarayorg Bale, and once again I apologize to you on their behalf. I hope you do not hold a grudge against us. Tatsuya waved his hand and said, You don't have to apologize again, my name is Tatsuya Shiba, I hope we get along in the future. The guy also nodded his head and said, I hope so as well. And they both shook their hands. Then the blonde girl besides Koisha came forward and said, Nice to meet you, I am Koriana Andre Alpha Sarayorg Sama's bishop. I hope we get along well. Are you Koisha's boyfriend? Hearing this, Koisha blushed and glared at Koriana and said, WW, what are you saying, we are not like that. But Tatsuya stepped forward and looked in her eyes, making her look back in his eyes as well. Koisha was mesmerized by him but then came out of it when Tatsuya said, Why are you being shy to tell her about our relationship, she is your friend right? Koriana's eyes then shined and she looked at Koisha and said, Really, Koisha got herself a boyfriend, now that's interesting. Koisha snapped and said, There is no such thing like that, he is not my boyfriend. Tatsuya then placed a hand on her shoulder and said, Don't be shy, you know Koriana, during the whole time she was at my place, I fed her all her meals with my own hands. We even slept in the same room. Hearing him, Koisha's forehead was twitching and she shouted, That was because I was unable to eat myself because of my broken hands. And you stayed in the same room because you had to heal Ingvilt. Tatsuya just smiled and said, Your flustered expression is really cute. And Koisha immediately blushed. Tatsuya then turned to the other two and said, Now jokes aside, I would like to do my work soon, so if it is not a trouble can I meet your king? Both Regulus and Koriana became a bit serious and asked, What business do you have with Sarayorg-sama? Hearing the question, Koisha also came out of her stupor and said, I will explain it all, once we see master, it would also be better to explain all of them together. While pointing at the corpses her friends, Koriana and Regulus nodded and said, Okay then, follow us. Tatsuya nodded and started following them while lifting the corpses with his telekinesis. Walking in the large hallway, they encountered some maids and butlers on the way who respectfully bowed on seeing the peerage members while also looking weirdly at Tatsuya and the floating corpses. After walking for a while, Tatsuya and the others reached a room with a large door. Regulus then stepped forward and knocked on the door. Soon a voice saying, Who was heard, and Regulus calmly said, Master, it's me, Regulus. Then a come in was heard. Regulus asked the others to wait and then went inside. After waiting for a while, Regulus came out and said, You all may come in. With a nervous face. Seeing the nervousness on his face, Tatsuya used his telepathy to hear his thoughts and then gave a mental sigh. All of them entered the room, and no sooner did Tatsuya enter the room he was welcomed by a fist. Tatsuya simply caught the fist and punched the person who attacked him, making him crash to the wall and successfully knocking him out cold. Tatsuya then looked at Regulus, who was looking at him with an apologetic expression, and said, Sorry for such inconvenience, but as soon as master knew that you beat all 5 of them without any effort, he became excited and wanted to fight you. I truly apologize for his behavior. And gave a deep bow to Tatsuya, followed by Koisha and Koriana, who were bowing as well. Tatsuya just sighed and asked, Where should I keep them? All 3 of them looked up and had a grateful look on their faces. After a while, Sarayorg woke up and then clutched his stomach in pain. He then looked around and saw 5 members of his peerage knocked out cold. He then started thinking about what happened and then suddenly stood up and saw Tatsuya and the others sitting on a sofa while having some tea. Tatsuya noticed him and then said, You sure show some nice hospitality to others. Hearing him, the other 3 also looked at Sarayorg and stood up and slightly bowed to him. Sarayorg raised his hand and stopped them and said, What can I do? I became so much excited when I heard that you beat most of my peerage with such ease. By the way, I am Sarayorg Bale, the king of this peerage. Tatsuya nodded and said, Tatsuya Shiba, nice to meet you. Sarayorg then clenched his fist and said, Tatsuya, hey, you are strong, I will fight you again sometime. Tatsuya stared at him with a deadpan expression and then sighed and said, Sure, whatever. Now are you all still going to pretend to be unconscious? All of them then looked at the corpses, who fidgeted a bit when Tatsuya mentioned them and slowly stood up with an embarrassed expression. Tatsuya then nodded and said, Good. now that all of you are conscious, kindly take your seats, and Koisha start explaining. All of them nodded their heads and followed his instructions. After Koisha was done explaining, all of them were silent while Tatsuya was simply sipping on his tea. Sareorg was clutching his fist in anger and then smashed it on the table and said, "Those damn geezers!" and cursed the higher-ups for trying to sell Ingvild, because of which Koisha got in danger. The others were also angry but were controlling themselves. He then looked at Tatsuya and said, "Tatsuya, I am very grateful to you for saving my queen. If not for you we would not be able to see her again, thank you." Tatsuya waved his hands and said, "It's all right, more importantly let's talk about the main business that I came here for, Koisha, if you may." Koisha nodded her head and said, "Sareorg-sama, you do know that the lady who was kidnapped along with me was also suffering from the same disease as Miss Lasama, right?" Sareorg nodded his head and said, "Yeah, that's why I sent you to check on her condition, because she was suffering from a similar disease like mother's." Koisha nodded and said, "After we were rescued by Tatsuya, he said that he was able to heal her and did so a few days ago. She seemed to be back to her normal healthy condition, and I have witnessed this all from my own eyes." Tatsuya also nodded and said, "Yeah, she slept in the same room as me daily and saw me do it firsthand." Koisha heard him and blushed and said, "There is no need to phrase it like that so that the others misunderstand us." The others looked at them with a sweat drop, but then Sareorg got their attention and said, "So you mean to say that Tatsuya is capable of curing my mother?" Tatsuya then put his cup down and said, "Yes and no, I was indeed able to cure Ingvild, but that was only because her sacred gear was also helping, so while I can try to heal your mother, I cannot guarantee that it would be successful." Sareorg thought for a while and then nodded his head in understanding. He then looked at Tatsuya and then bowed his head and said, "Thank you very much for your cooperation. Even if it is a little, my mother still has some hope, right?" Tatsuya nodded and said, "Don't worry, I would try my best to save her. I know how important one's family is." Sareorg nodded and smiled. He then stood up and moved his hand forward and said, "Once again thanks a lot, and let's get along from now on." Tatsuya stood up as well and shook his hand and said, "I hope so as well." Sareorg then looked at the others and said, "Okay, all of you rest for now, and tomorrow we will visit mother in the Satrai territory." When Tatsuya heard that, he thought, "Let's hope that we don't come across Sira or Sana tomorrow, otherwise it would be way too much of a hassle to explain them," and gave a tired sigh. Koisha noticed it and asked, "What's wrong?" Tatsuya looked at her and said, "Nothing, just praying for my well-being." Koisha became more confused but didn't think much about it and then started showing Tatsuya around the mansion.
That is all for today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. If you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please drop a comment down below.